Dexter's gloved hand hovers over a bound victim's throat. The knife is ready, the plastic is sealed, the alibi is airtight, and then he hears a child crying in the next room and stops. Cut to Dexter with a clean escape route from the Bay Harbor butcher investigation, only to double back because Deb is walking blind into the line of fire. Cut again to a kill perfectly staged until he sees the fear in someone's eyes and chooses to walk away instead of finish the job. These aren't glitches in an otherwise flawless predator. These are the pattern. Every time Dexter's plan is about to work, he's the one who breaks it. Not the police. Not some rival killer. Dexter, let's kick things off with that contradiction, because it sits at the heart of his entire psychology. A man who calls himself a monster, yet repeatedly sabotages his own survival to protect other people. By design, Dexter Morgan is supposed to be a pure predator. Harry's code trains him to stalk, test, and eliminate deserving targets while keeping innocents out of the splash zone. It's a tactical system. Minimize risk, minimize evidence, minimize exposure. But over and over, we watch him make choices that make no sense for a survival-driven psychopath and perfect sense for someone who feels guilt, attachment, and responsibility. In this video, we're going to sit right inside that gap between what he says he is and what he keeps doing anyway. The central question is simple and dangerous. Is Dexter just following a rigid set of rules to avoid getting caught, or do these moments of hesitation, protection, and sacrifice prove that there is a real conscience under the code? When he abandons a kill because Deb might see something she can't unsee, is that operational discipline or emotional terror at breaking his sister? When he shields Rita and Harrison from the consequences of his double life, is he protecting a cover story or a family he actually loves? Keep this clear, we're moving season by season, all the way through New Blood, isolating specific scenes where his trajectory could have stayed perfectly controlled if he'd just stayed cold. Each major section will track a moment where the monster should have finished the plan, but the man flinched. Early on, those cracks are tiny. A pause, a lie softened, a target spared. By the end, they've widened into a full collapse of the identity he's been clinging to since childhood. Along the way, we'll keep drawing a hard line between Harry's code and an actual conscience. Harry taught Dexter to channel his urges into people who deserve it, but a conscience is about emotional consequences, not just tactical ones. The focus is not just on who Dexter kills, but on who he refuses to sacrifice. Deb as his moral mirror, Rita and Harrison as emotional anchors, Dokes as the human cost of Dexter's secrets, Hannah and Iron Lake as his final exam. And the first real crack in that armor? It's not a grand confession or a heroic sacrifice. It's a tiny, almost throwaway decision in Season 1, a moment he could have erased without anyone knowing. Except he doesn't. Because, for once, the code isn't the loudest voice in his head. That tiny decision only makes sense if we admit something Dexter spends the whole first season denying. There is more operating inside him than Harry's rulebook and a hunger to kill. To keep this clear, we need to separate the machinery Harry built from the thing that keeps jamming it. Harry's code, on paper, is brutally simple. Only kill people who are proven killers. Let the police investigation do the screening. Never get caught. Leave no trace. It's a workflow, not a religion. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. Leave no evidence. Every step is designed to minimize risk, manage exposure, and channel Dexter's urges into a controlled, repeatable plan. That's the point. The code is pragmatic, not ethical. It never asks, should this person suffer? It asks, can I be absolutely sure they're guilty, and can I get away with it? The psychology here is risk management, not remorse. Harry is building a containment system around what he thinks is a pure monster, a way to weaponize Dexter without collapsing the rest of the world. In this video, we're going to use a different word for the thing that keeps breaking that containment: conscience. Not in the abstract church sermon sense, but as a specific internal response that pushes against self-interest. Guilt that lingers when the body is gone. Empathy that shows up as protective instinct. Remorse that makes Dexter change course even when the optimal survival move is obvious. Anytime he acts against his own best tactical interests, we're going to ask why. So here's the diagnostic lens that will guide every scene we cover. When Dexter deviates from the perfect escape, is he obeying the code, reacting to fear of exposure, or doing something that only makes sense if he actually cares? The focus is not just on what he does, but on what it costs him. Does the choice tighten his control, or does it blow a hole in his plan for no clear strategic gain? We can already see the split in Season 1. Listen to his narration when he talks about blood spatter, bodies on tables, the thrill of the cut. It's almost clinical, a forensic report delivered from inside the murder. Then listen to him describe Deb, desperate for Harry's approval, or Rita, fragile and recovering from abuse. Suddenly the language softens. There's protectiveness, even tenderness. Two different operating systems, running in parallel, waiting to collide. And behind both is Harry's fear. The exhausted cop who walks into a shipping container realizes what his adopted son is becoming, and decides the only way to prevent total collapse is a strict set of rules. He thinks he's building handcuffs. He accidentally builds moral training wheels. That's why the code so often clashes with emotional reality. Sometimes following it would keep Dexter perfectly safe while destroying Deb. Other times, breaking it risks everything but spares an innocent. Those collision points are the moments we're zeroing in on. Because Season 1 is our baseline, this is the version of Dexter who still believes he's just a monster with rules. And the ice truck killer, along with the people he thinks he's only using as cover, is about to prove how wrong he is about himself. So let's kick things off with one of the earliest moments where Dexter's own story about himself doesn't quite match what we're seeing on screen. Season 1 Miami, Early Bay Harbor trajectory. Dexter is still telling us, in that cool, detached voiceover, that he feels nothing, that Rita is camouflage, that Deb is a shield, that every smile is just part of the plan. On paper, this is peak control. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. To keep this clear, we're not talking about a gray area suspect or a mistaken identity. We're talking about the human trafficker who keeps a little boy locked in a shipping container, a man Dexter has fully vetted as a killer and already wrapped in plastic in his mind. The code would absolutely sign off on this one. But then the operation bends. The boy is found alive. Deb's investigation heats up around the case. The killer is still technically in play, still a threat, and Dexter has a clean shot to make him disappear. From a pure survival standpoint, eliminating him now would reduce risk. One less variable, one less witness, one less loose end that could point back to a very specific blood spatter analyst. Instead, Dexter hesitates. He doesn't drag the man to a table. He doesn't indulge the dark passenger. He redirects. On voiceover, he frames it as logistics, as code language, too many cops, too much attention, wrong timing. But the camera lingers not on the suspect. It lingers on the boy, on the small, shaking body in a blanket, on Dexter watching him with something that looks suspiciously like recognition. The central question is, what is actually driving that decision in that moment? If this were only about Harry's rules and operational safety, the smart move is to finish the job before the system can fail another kid. Yet, Dexter chooses the path that leaves the killer alive a little longer and himself more exposed, while the child and Deb's case remain intact. That's not tactical perfection. That's an emotional trade-off. In this video, we're going to keep seeing that split between what Dexter says and what Dexter does. Here, his behavior betrays him. He's more focused on the boy's fragile psychology, on Deb's fragile career, than on engineering the perfect, untraceable kill. The focus is not just on a predator avoiding detection anymore. It's on a man who cannot quite stomach adding more collateral damage to a scene already soaked in someone else's cruelty. And the show knows it. The spared innocent gets the final close-up. Dexter gets the unsettled reaction shot, like he's surprised by his own restraint, like some buried conscience just overruled the code without asking permission. So when Brian later mocks Dexter's fake life and fake feelings, those taunts land differently. We've already watched him choose emotional consequences over procedural neatness. Harry didn't program that. Harry didn't design his experiment to protect Deb's heart or a stranger's child over a flawless kill. This is the seed. The moment where the code stops being the ceiling of Dexter's morality and starts looking like a limit he's already outgrowing. And the next time that conscience interferes, it won't just cost him a target, it will drag him into open conflict with the one thing he's never dared question: Harry's legacy itself. And when that limit gets tested, it almost always has the same name attached to it: Dexter Morgan. From the pilot onward, Deb is the crack in Dexter's fade he never manages to seal. The swearing, insecure detective in ill-fitting vice uniforms becomes the one fixed point in his trajectory. He tells us he doesn't really care about anyone, yet every time Deb's safety, career, or sanity brush up against his world, his plan for perfect control buckles. The central question becomes unavoidable. If he feels nothing, why does he keep choosing her over his own survival? To keep this clear, we need to sit in that Season 1-2 transition, where the ice truck killer and the Bay Harbor butcher aren't just cases, but concentric circles closing around Deb. Brian kidnaps her, chains her to the table, turns her into a prop in Dexter's initiation fantasy. Dexter could walk away, let his brother solve his problem, erase the emotional liability that is Deborah. Instead, he kills Brian and manufactures a crime scene that keeps her alive and ignorant. Operationally, that's a failure. Psychologically, it's a confession. Deb matters more than the purity of his secret. Then Season 2 tightens the noose. The investigation into the Bay Harbor butcher is literally built from Dexter's own blood slides, and Deb is right there in the task force, orbiting his crimes. This is where a truly self-preserving predator would lean back, let suspicion drift toward Dokes, and stay small. But Dexter keeps intervening in ways that drag Deb closer, not farther from the blast radius. Think about the cabin. Dokes in a cage, the evidence stacked, Lila circling. Dexter has a clean exit if he lets Lila finish Dokes and walks away. Deb's career rebounds, the department gets closure, the pattern resets. Instead, he keeps inserting himself, moving bodies, altering evidence, and ultimately confronting Lila in a way that exposes his emotional tells. None of that extra risk is required to preserve the code. It's required to preserve Deb from the shrapnel of his choices. Listen to his narration in these moments. He frames each move as strategic, as if he's just optimizing the board, but the timing betrays him. He doesn't act when the investigation peaks, he acts when Deb breaks. When she's shaking after Brian, when she's spiraling about dating another killer, when she begs for honesty about the Bay Harbor butcher, he gives her half-truths that are vastly more dangerous than silence. That is not camouflage. That is an irrational drive to relieve her pain, even if it accelerates his own collapse. Harry's code never says, risk exposure to protect your sister's feelings. If anything, it implies the opposite. So, where does this impulse come from? Along the way, we watch an unspoken, self-generated rule emerge. Deb comes first. Her tears override his rituals. Her vulnerability disarms the monster Harry thought he built. And this is only the early warning. Because the deeper the series goes, the more Deb stops being just Dexter's anchor and starts becoming his final moral test, forcing choices that will permanently rewrite who he believes he is. If Deb is the first crack in Dexter's self-image, Rita is the slow, quiet demolition of his entire fade. On paper, she is perfect, damaged, gentle, and so exhausted by trauma that she doesn't demand much. In Season 1, Dexter looks at her and sees a plan. Let's kick things off with that original calculation. A woman recovering from an abusive ex, 2 kids, low expectations of sex or emotional availability. For Dexter, this is camouflage with a heartbeat. Dating Rita keeps him off the investigation radar, makes him look stable in front of Miami Metro, and gives him a socially acceptable reason to dodge deeper intimacy. I'm with Rita becomes both shield and excuse. At first, we watch him perform the role with clinical precision. He brings donuts, shows up for dinner, fixes a car, listens to stories about Paul. Stalk the target, maintain the cover, avoid suspicion. These boyfriend duties are just another ritual, like plastic wrap and knives, only with more casseroles. The focus is not just on what he does, but on how detached he insists he is while doing it. And then, almost imperceptibly, the trajectory changes. We start seeing moments where there is no direct tactical benefit, no obvious code advantage, and Dexter still leans in. He volunteers to take the kids to the park. He comforts Rita after Paul calls from prison. He intervenes when Aster and Cody show signs of fear that mirror his own childhood. Along the way, the performance starts looking a lot like attachment. Is this still control? Or is the mask teaching the man underneath how to feel? The central question crystallizes when Paul re-enters their lives. Here's a violent abuser, a clear threat to Rita and the kids. From a code perspective, Dexter has a simple option. Put Paul on a table, tie him to a string of past victims, and eliminate the danger cleanly. No loose ends. No messy custody battles. Yet he doesn't. Instead, he plants drugs, manipulates evidence, and engineers Paul's return to prison. Operationally, that's a failure of efficiency. Psychologically, it's something else. Dexter chooses the path that preserves Rita's moral universe. Paul is taken down by his own addiction and criminal record, not by a secret execution. It's uglier for Dexter, riskier for the investigation, but it lets Rita believe in a world where the system, not a hidden butcher, delivered justice. His narration betrays the shift. He starts talking about Rita and the kids as things he needs, people he wants to protect. That is not code language. That is attachment. And it drags new variables into every plan: stability, safety, the long-term consequences of violence on children who have already seen too much. In this video, we're going to watch that illusion of normal escalate, because once Dexter becomes a father, this fragile balance between code and conscience doesn't just wobble, it widens into a chasm he cannot cross without breaking something. His rules, his cover, or whatever heart he has managed to grow. And nowhere does that chasm open wider than in the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, when Dexter's private ritual becomes a public manhunt, with his name written between every line of the case file. We go from quiet slides in an air conditioner to divers hauling up garbage bags full of bodies, the FBI swarming Miami Metro, and Frank Lundy calmly describing a predator who is, unknowingly, standing 3 feet away. This is Dexter's worst nightmare, his trophies discovered, his ocean dumps mapped, his entire secret life dragged into fluorescent light. To keep this clear, the rational move for a survival-driven killer is simple. Cut ties. Burn evidence. Pick a scapegoat. Frame them so thoroughly the investigation collapses under its own certainty. Or disappear and let Miami carry the consequences. A pure monster would treat the city, his colleagues, even Deb, as collateral. The plan is preservation at any cost. But the central question in this arc is, why doesn't Dexter do that? Why, when the Bay Harbor Butcher label is up for grabs, does he keep trying to make sure it lands on someone who actually deserves it? We see it in small choices first. When the task force starts circling innocent suspects, Dexter quietly sabotages the momentum. He analyzes trace, nudges blood work, and loses angles that would harden the case against people who merely fit the profile. Letting the investigation lock onto the wrong man would buy him time and safety. Instead, he helps Lundy steer away from dead ends, preserving the integrity of cases built on his own kills. The focus is not just on escaping, it's on making sure the story told about those bodies is, in his warped way, accurate. That becomes brutal when James Dokes rises to the top of the suspect list. From a purely tactical standpoint, it's perfect. Dokes already suspects Dexter, already looks dangerous, already has a record. All Dexter has to do is step back and let the system do what it does. No kill room. No risk. Problem solved. Yet he hesitates. He stalks Dokes not to eliminate him, but to understand him, to search for a path where an innocent man doesn't die for his sins. Even when Dexter imprisons Dokes in that cabin, we feel the conflict. He keeps looking for another option, delaying the final decision, trying to redirect blame towards someone genuinely guilty like Leela, rather than simply letting the accusation stand. And this is where Harry's code stops being a sufficient explanation. Harry taught Dexter not to get caught. He did not teach him to protect the reputations of dead killers, the careers of his colleagues, or the procedural cleanliness of an FBI investigation. Yet Dexter cares about all of that. He wants the narrative of the Bay Harbor Butcher to match his own psychology, his own belief that he only takes those who deserve it. In this video, we're going to keep watching how that conscience complicates everything. Dexter spends more time correcting injustices, massaging evidence, and redirecting suspicion toward the truly guilty than a survival-driven monster ever would, and every adjustment increases his exposure. Along the way, he learns the ugliest lesson of this season, even when he tries to protect innocence. Even when he clings to a twisted moral logic, someone like Dokes can still end up as the body that makes his plan work. And that brings us to the one man Dexter never wanted as part of his plan, but absolutely could not ignore, Sergeant James Dokes. From the first glare across the bullpen to the late-night stakeouts, Dokes isn't just another cop on the investigation board. He's Dexter's relentless shadow, the only person at Miami Metro who looks past the jokes and the donuts and sees something predatory staring back. Dokes stalks him. He tails him to crime scenes, to docks, to late-night drives that should be invisible. He calls him out in front of colleagues, risks his own reputation by accusing the beloved blood guy of being dangerous. In a world built on Dexter's illusion of control, Dokes is the glitch in the matrix that refuses to be patched. And from a pure predator standpoint, the logical response is obvious. Remove the threat early and cleanly. If Dexter were only the monster he claims to be, Dokes would have disappeared in Season 1. No more tail, no more suspicion, no more risk of exposure. Yet in this video, we're going to sit with the fact that he never does that. Instead, Dexter spends an entire season misdirecting him, planting fake evidence, sabotaging his career, doing everything except the simplest, coldest move. Why? What line is he refusing to cross? To keep this clear, look at how far Dexter lets the pressure build. Dokes confronts him at crime scenes. He breaks into Dexter's apartment. He literally holds Dexter at gunpoint in the Everglades, threatening not just his freedom, but his entire constructed identity. That's the perfect tactical justification to kill, in self-defense. Yet Dexter disarms him, escapes, and still doesn't finish him. The failure here isn't operational. It's in Dexter's own refusal to treat Dokes as just another target. The cabin sequences make that tension impossible to ignore. Dexter has Dokes caged, isolated, fully at his mercy. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation is closing in, and every hour Dokes stays alive increases the odds of collapse. Control says kill him. Survival says kill him. Harry's code, though, says something different. Dokes is a good cop, not a killer. Dexter's internal narration repeats that. He keeps looking for another out, fantasizing about framing, about escape, about any solution that doesn't involve murdering a man who doesn't fit. And then Leela walks in and does what Dexter will not. She blows up the cabin, kills Dokes, and hands Dexter the perfect outcome on paper. The investigation ends. The Bay Harbor Butcher case is closed. And Dexter's secret survives. The focus is not just on the external victory. It's on his face when he realizes what she's done. There's no relief. There's horror. There's anger. Because an innocent, by his code, just died in his place. Along the way, Dexter keeps carrying that weight. He references Dokes across seasons as a moral debt he can't balance. A reminder that his survival is literally built on the body of a man who was right about him. And the central question becomes, when other innocents are threatened by his secret later, will he again let someone else pay the price, or finally choose to put himself on the table instead? And that question crashes straight into the moment Dexter becomes something Harry never planned for him to be, a father. Harrison's birth is a seismic shift. Before, Dexter's family life is a performance, a cover story to stabilize the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation and keep suspicion off his trail. Now there is an actual infant depending on him, a real heartbeat, a real future. For the first time, the consequences of failure aren't just prison or exposure. They're a child growing up alone because his father's plan finally collapsed. To keep this clear, Harry's code was engineered for a solo predator. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. There is no clause for, what if you have to leave mid-hunt because the babysitter cancels? There is no line about trauma bonding with a son who might share your darkness. Fatherhood doesn't just complicate the code, it exposes how incomplete it always was. We see it immediately in the way Dexter starts weighing every hunt against Harrison's safety. In Season 4, there are moments where he's literally juggling a kill schedule with diaper changes. Racing from a would-be kill room back to the house because Rita calls, or because Harrison's crying interrupts his ritualized focus. More than once, he abandons or delays a kill because that second layer kicks in. If something goes wrong tonight, Harrison loses his father. Is any perfect tableau worth that? Then the show hands him a dark mirror, Arthur Mitchell, the Trinity Killer. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to Trinity because he is Dexter's nightmare future, a meticulous serial killer, a devoted family man, a double life that looks sustainable from the outside. But when Dexter infiltrates that home, when he watches the terror in Trinity's children, he sees the real psychology of his own fantasy. The focus is not just on Trinity's murders, it's on the way his violence saturates breakfast tables, bedrooms, and holidays. Dexter doesn't just investigate a killer, he investigates what his own son could become. So he starts trying to shield Harrison from all of it. He keeps him away from crime scenes. He pushes for moving, for distance, for a quieter life that would theoretically reduce the need to kill. This is the same man who once insisted he needed the ritual to function, now contemplating giving up control of that need because a baby gurgles in his arms. What do we call that, if not a conscience waking up under the code? Listen to his narration around Harrison. The language changes. Love, hope, fear, about what kind of man his son will be. Each major section of Dexter's inner monologue now runs on 2 tracks: the logistics of the plan and the moral weather report for Harrison's future. Harrison becomes the ultimate leverage point. Every decision has a second question attached. What does this do to my son? And that question repeatedly derails his most efficient, code-aligned moves. Along the way, the show is quietly loading a bomb. Trinity's final act. Harrison left in blood, just like Dexter once was. When that detonates, it will fuse Dexter's guilt, his code, and his fragile conscience into one knot he can never fully untangle. The illusion that he can keep the monster and the father perfectly separated, that dies in that bathroom, and everything after has to answer for it. Trinity is where that bomb actually goes off. A quiet deacon, a loving husband on the surface, a man who has been killing for decades without an investigation ever catching up to him. On paper, he is everything Dexter thinks he wants to be: efficient, invisible, and embedded in a picture-perfect family. To keep this clear, Trinity is not just another big bad. He's Dexter's dark mirror. Same compulsion, same ritual, same need for control. But unlike Dexter, Arthur Mitchell has managed to sustain his pattern across an entire adult life, raising kids, serving his church, and still completing his gruesome cycle. The central question for Dexter in this season becomes brutally simple. If this man can balance murder and domesticity, why can't I learn how? So Dexter makes a plan. He doesn't stalk Trinity as prey, he approaches him as a mentor. In this video, we're going to see how that choice marks a pivot from code to curiosity. Dexter tells himself, this is a controlled experiment. Infiltrate Arthur's life. Study his psychology, refine his own double existence, then take him out. Observe first. Kill later. No consequences. Immediately, the red flags start piling up. We see Arthur screaming at his son, terrorizing his daughter, weaponizing religion and guilt to keep everyone in line. The family dinners are suffocating. The children's eyes do all the talking. Any normal conscience would say, this man is a monster to the people closest to him. End it now. Even Harry's code would back that up. But Dexter keeps delaying, not because the code demands more proof, but because he is greedy for lessons. He wants to know how Arthur kept the investigation off his back, how he compartmentalized the monster and the father, how he made the lie look so stable for so long. Every extra day Arthur lives is another day Dexter chooses insight over safety. Another day he gambles with consequences he refuses to imagine landing at his own doorstep. That gamble ends in a bathtub. Rita's body in the water. Harrison on the floor, crying, sitting in blood that perfectly echoes the image that created Dexter himself. The illusion of control doesn't just crack, it collapses in a single, unforgettable tableau. Dexter's reaction is not the cool detachment he's always bragged about. He is shattered. Shock, horror, and a visceral recognition that this is not random. This is him. His internal narration finally drops the mask. He doesn't just mourn Rita, he traces the trajectory back to his own choices. He brought Trinity into their orbit. He protected the experiment instead of his family. He prioritized being a better killer over being a safe husband and father. That is guilt, not strategy. Sustained, choking guilt. From here on, every time Dexter looks at Harrison, he's not just seeing a son. He's seeing a living crime scene. A reminder that his conscience failed when it mattered most. Along the way, that memory will haunt every new plan, every attempt at control, and every future relationship he dares to build. So, when we hit season 5, and Lumen literally climbs out of a barrel, we're watching Dexter stare at a living reminder of what his violence did to his family. Harrison's bathtub. Rita's blood. Now, it's another woman. Another trauma. Except this time, he's not the cause. He's the witness. And for once, his conscience doesn't look away. Let's kick things off with the basic problem. Lumen is not a killer. She's a survivor. By Harry's code, she's a liability, not a project. She's seen his face. She's seen his kill room. She's emotionally shattered and unpredictable. To keep this clear, every line of code logic screams the same solution. Remove the witness. Erase the risk. Restore control. That's the plan the old Dexter would follow without hesitation. Instead, he does something that makes no operational sense. He protects her. He hides her. He feeds her information about the investigation into the Barrel Girls. The focus is not just on keeping his secret anymore, but on containing her pain. When she fixates on the men who tortured her, Dexter doesn't shut her down. He listens. He recognizes a psychology that mirrors his own, not in the urge to kill, but in the obsessive need to answer an injury with action. That's why his next move is so dangerous. He trains her. He walks Lumen through plastic, knives, the ritual language of the kill room. But unlike Miguel, this is not about building an apprentice to expand his reach. It's about giving her agency in the one arena he understands, controlled violence. He lets her stab, he lets her choose, and he accepts the consequences when things get messy. Because the central question for him quietly shifts from how do I stay safe to how do I help her feel whole. And the partnership itself breaks his usual pattern. Dexter isn't stalking alone, executing alone, cleaning up alone. He's adapting his methods to her emotional state, delaying kills when she panics, altering locations when a memory triggers her, abandoning the most efficient paths to minimize her re-traumatization. There's a moment with Jordan Chase's men where Dexter could take the cleaner shot, end it quickly, and walk away. Instead, he puts himself in more danger to keep Lumen from being captured again, from reliving the helplessness that defines her trauma. Operational failure risk goes up, emotional damage for her goes down. That trade only makes sense if a conscience is driving. Along the way, even his narration betrays the shift. The I starts to become we. We hunt. We plan. We finish this. He worries about how she feels, not just whether she'll expose him. And when her need for vengeance is finally satisfied and she leaves, Dexter is devastated. Not because he lost a convenient ally, but because the brief, fragile illusion of a shared life collapses overnight. Lumen proves he can align with someone else's pain and bend his code around it. The next question is whether he can sustain that with someone who isn't fueled by revenge. In other words, what happens when Hannah walks in and his conscience meets a different kind of temptation? Hannah is temptation, but Deb is impact. If Lumen was a trial run for shared violence, Deb walking into that church in the season 6 finale is the moment the entire fantasy of control shatters. Concrete image first, plastic sheeting, Travis Marshall on the table, Dexter mid-monologue with the knife raised. The ritual is perfect, the plan is complete, the code is satisfied. And then the door opens. Deborah steps in. She watches her brother drive steel into a living man. In one shot, every compartment Dexter has built, blood work, family dinners, late night work, collapses into a single horrifying truth she cannot unsee. To keep this clear, the rational move from a pure predator's psychology would be brutal. He could spin it as self-defense, gaslight her, frame Travis as an imminent threat, and bury the evidence before the investigation catches up. If we extend that logic to its darkest edge, he could even eliminate Deb, the only witness who truly knows him, and walk out with his code and cover intact. No loose ends, no emotional variables, total control. But that's not what happens. Dexter freezes. He doesn't lunge at Deb. He doesn't chase her away. He doesn't even finish the ritual with his usual detachment. He starts explaining, haltingly at first, then with a grim, almost desperate clarity, he begins a long, painful effort to bring Deb into his moral universe instead of pushing her out of his life. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what the code would suggest and what his conscience actually does. He chooses partial honesty, which is still a massive breach in his operational defenses. He reveals Harry's code, the childhood trauma, the compulsion to kill. Each admission is a strategic failure if survival is the only metric. Every word gives Deb more leverage to destroy him, more grounds to turn him in, more weight pressing on her already fragile psyche. And then Dexter does something even more dangerous. He starts adjusting his behavior for her. The focus is not just on who he kills, but on when he chooses not to. He slows down. He justifies more. He passes on targets he believes fit the code because he can see the toll it's taking on Deb. Her panic attacks, her insomnia, her spiraling sense of complicity. Her conscience begins to override his urges, and that is a seismic shift in his trajectory. Each major section of their conflict is marked by her breakdowns and confrontations. Deb begging him to stop. Deb asking, "How is this different from murder?" Deb accusing him of enjoying it. His response is not rage or threat. It's a visible, pained recalculation. As if he's trying to solve an impossible equation, his need to kill versus her need to believe in some version of him that isn't a monster. This is where Dexter's conscience becomes relational. It's no longer an abstract rule about innocent lives. It's about not annihilating the one person he loves most with the truth of who he is. And along the way, the central question quietly changes. It's not, can Dexter keep Deb safe from the world anymore? It's, can he keep Deb safe from himself? The ultimate test of that love-driven conscience is still coming, because there will be a moment when Deb has to choose between Dexter and an innocent life, and Dexter will let her make that choice, fully aware of what it's going to cost him. And then the show does something deceptively romantic and quietly horrifying at the same time. It gives Dexter the one thing he's never had before, a partner who doesn't need the mask at all. Hannah McKay walks into the investigation as a survivor, a witness, a loose end from an old killing spree. But the more Dexter digs, the more the fade collapses. She's not just connected to violence, she's fluent in it. A poisoner with her own private code. A woman who can look at Dexter's darkness and not flinch. For the first time, he can imagine a plan where he doesn't have to perform normalcy, where the person across the table understands what the knives and plastic actually mean. That's exactly why she's so dangerous. To keep this clear, Hannah represents two opposite poles at once: emotional safety for Dexter and existential risk for Harrison. She's morally compromised, impulsive, and perfectly willing to remove obstacles with a dose in a smoothie. We watch that ethical tension crystallize when Sal Price closes in. Hannah kills him to protect their secret, and Dexter helps clean it up. From a distance, it looks like alignment. Up close, it's a fracture line, running straight through Dexter's conscience. The break becomes visible when Hannah turns that poison inward on Dexter's world. Deb's car crash, the suspicion of poisoning, the dawning realization that Hannah will harm anyone who threatens their relationship. Dexter's response is telling. He doesn't just confront her, he turns her in. He forges evidence, hands her to the system, and in doing so, chooses Harrison's safety over his own desire to be fully seen. If he truly believed he was only a monster, why does he keep sabotaging the one person who validates that identity? In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that gap between what Dexter says he is and what his behavior reveals. With Hannah, the central question isn't, is she worthy of love? It's, can Dexter love a killer and still protect his son? He wants to believe those things can coexist. He fantasizes about a shared trajectory, co-parents in crime, raising Harrison in a twisted version of honesty. But when Deb is endangered, when Harrison's orbit even brushes Hannah's volatility, Dexter's plan collapses. He distances himself, he sends Harrison away, he keeps his son physically and psychologically insulated from the woman he's falling for. Notice how irrelevant Harry's code is here. There's no rule for loving another predator. No clause for co-parenting with someone who treats murder as a lifestyle choice. Dexter is improvising, guided less by procedure and more by an emerging conscience that's trying to break the cycle of trauma he and Trinity already carved into their families. Hannah keeps insisting he's capable of care, that he's more than a mask, and every time he chooses Harrison over her, he proves she's right. Along the way, the show is quietly setting up new blood. This tension between love, violence, and fatherhood doesn't disappear, it mutates. The next time Dexter has to choose between a relationship that understands his darkness and a son who rejects it, the consequences will be final. And that tension finally snaps in the late seasons, when Deb isn't just hurt by Dexter's choices anymore. She's structurally broken by them. The detective who once anchored the investigation, the conscience of the show, is now waking up every day next to a secret she can't live with, and a brother she can't live without. That's the trajectory of their relationship, from banter to shared crime scene to mutual psychological collapse. Let's kick things off with Deb unraveling. After the church, after La Huerta, Deb is drowning in alcohol, guilt, and panic attacks. Bodies are no longer abstract case files. They're people she watched her brother kill or cover up. The focus is not just on Dexter's killings here, but on the way each plan to protect Deb actually strips another layer off her sense of self. She's compromised her badge, her morality, and her identity, and she knows exactly who taught her to bend the rules. That's why the key confrontation between them lands so hard. Deb has the power to end this. She can walk into Miami Metro, hand over the evidence, and let the system devour the Bay Harbor butcher. And for once, Dexter doesn't scramble for an alibi or a new scheme. He stops. He looks at her, and he accepts whatever judgment she chooses. No escape route, no backup plan. Just, in essence, if turning me in saves you, do it. To keep this clear, Dexter's surrender here is not primarily about the law. It's about Deb's soul. He's finally recognizing that his presence is toxic to her, that every day he stays free is another day she has to twist herself into someone she hates. The central question for him shifts from how do I stay in control to how do I stop destroying the one person who ever loved me unconditionally. That's not Harry's code talking. That's conscience. We see it again when he explicitly tells Deb to do what's right by her standards, not his. He doesn't invoke the code, doesn't argue that La Huerta deserved it, doesn't reframe the investigation as a necessary evil. He gives her full moral agency, even though her recovery could mean his execution. Her psychological survival finally outranks his physical survival. And then the hurricane. Deb on a ventilator. Brain dead because of a chain reaction that began with Dexter's secret life. He could run. He could disappear. Instead, he unplugs her, carries her body into the storm, and effectively trades his future for a final, brutal act of honesty, acknowledging that his choices put her there. It's euthanasia, grief, and confession in a single image. Each major section will keep coming back to this. Harry's code could never have predicted this outcome. The experiment was designed to prevent collateral damage, not to teach Dexter how to grieve it. What we're watching in that hospital room is not the dark passenger, not the Bay Harbor butcher, but a brother who finally values Deb's life more than his own freedom. Along the way, he does flee. He becomes the lumberjack, then the man in Iron Lake. But Deb's death travels with him as a permanent indictment. He tried to live by the code and by a conscience, and the result was a sister in the ground and a ghost in his head. So when New Blood opens on a man in exile, we're not just asking whether he's still killing. We're asking, after Deb, what does right even mean to Dexter Morgan? So when we cut to Iron Lake and a man named Jim Lindsay jogging through the snow, stocking shelves at a sporting goods store, flirting awkwardly with the local police chief, it plays like a fantasy Dexter has written for himself. No kill room, no slides, just routines. Coffee, inventory, deer tracking, repeat, on the surface, this is the cleanest plan he has ever had. Total abstinence. Total control. A life governed by conscience alone. In this video, we're going to treat that opening stretch of New Blood as Dexter's most ambitious experiment. After Deb's death, after Harrison's abandonment, he decides the only moral move is to suffocate the dark passenger entirely. No code, because the code is what led him to rationalize every previous failure. The central question becomes, can he live by guilt and empathy instead of by Harry's rules, or is that just a new mask for the same psychology? To keep this clear, watch how ritual doesn't disappear, it mutates. Instead of plastic wrap and knives, we get mental checklists and imagined arguments with Deb. He talks to her ghost the way he once consulted Harry. But now the voice in his head is pure condemnation. She mocks his cravings, interrogates every impulse, calls out the consequences before he acts. When a potential target crosses his path, he forces himself into nonviolent outlets, chopping wood, running through the snow, rehearsing the mantra that he doesn't do that anymore. For a while, it works. Or at least, it looks like it works. He hasn't killed in years. He's careful, invisible, almost painfully polite. The focus is not just on what he's doing, but on what he's refusing to do, on the constant self-surveillance that keeps the dark passenger on ice. Then, Harrison walks back into his life. A teenage son, carrying abandonment, blood, and his own half-formed darkness, shows up at the edge of this carefully controlled exile. Instantly, the fantasy collapses. Small town, small secrets, big emotions. Dexter's plan shifts overnight from self-denial to fatherhood. Can he be present, honest, and protective without exposing who he is, in a place where every investigation is personal? Early on, we see him try. He tells Harrison partial truths, stays physically close, pushes to understand the boy's trauma before labeling him a monster. He risks drawing attention, inserting himself into school conflicts, drug circles, and local politics, because this time the priority is a living, breathing person, not a spotless cover story. And yet the first crack comes fast. When Dexter kills again in Iron Lake, he frames it as protection, as a necessary act to keep Harrison and the town safe. But listen to the logic. It's the code in new clothes, the same lethal calculus, now pretending to answer to conscience. Deb's ghost screams that he's crossed the line. Harry would have nodded. That's the crucial shift New Blood makes. Imagine Deb isn't a mentor. She's an internalized indictment, a running commentary on every moral shortcut. Each major section will show how that voice clashes with his old operating system, especially as Harrison starts forming his own verdict on what his father really is. Because very soon, Dexter won't just be choosing between killing and not killing. He'll be choosing between his son's love and the violent rules that have always defined him. And this time, Harrison gets a vote. And Harrison's vote doesn't stay theoretical for long. In Iron Lake, the what if of Dexter having a conscience collides with the what now of a son who has watched the consequences of his father's life from the outside and refuses to be drafted into the same war. Harrison is the living receipt for every plan Dexter ever made. He carries the trauma of being left in blood, the abandonment in the wake of Rita's death, and the genetic shadow of that potential darkness Dexter has spent seasons trying to domesticate with a code. He's past sins and future hopes in one teenager with a rifle, standing in the snow, asking the central question out loud, if you really care, why does everyone around you end up dead or broken? To keep this clear, the climax of New Blood isn't just a family argument. It's an investigation conducted by Harrison into the entire trajectory of Dexter Morgan's life. He doesn't only see Dad who kills bad guys. He sees Dokes framed and destroyed, LaGuerta executed for getting too close, Deb spiraling into self-destruction, and dying because she protected him. He sees the lies, the cover stories, the way every ally becomes collateral, and he names it. When Harrison accuses Dexter of killing good people, of warping everyone's morality just to keep his secret alive, we finally hear the indictment Harry never delivered. The focus is not just on the bodies on Dexter's tables, but on the people who bent their ethics, their careers, their sanity around him. Deb planting evidence. Batista defending a colleague who was lying to his face. Angela now staring down the same abyss. Harrison is saying what the series has been whispering for years. This isn't control. This is a slow motion collapse. And Dexter's reaction? He doesn't pivot to the code. He doesn't insist they were all necessary for the greater good. For once, he stops narrating and actually listens. We watch him register that his son's pain is not a temporary obstacle to be managed, but the final verdict on his entire psychology. That moment in the woods, when Harrison refuses to run and demands accountability, is the first time Dexter fully acknowledges that the harm he causes is bigger than his rules. From there, the logic is brutal and simple. As long as he's alive, Harrison will be orbiting a killer. More lies, more bodies, more chances to help Dad and become the thing he's terrified he already is. Dexter sees it. He says it. His presence is the ongoing crime scene, so he makes the one choice a true monster never would. He doesn't flee. He doesn't kill Angela. He doesn't turn the gun around and rewrite the narrative. He kneels in the snow and asks his son to pull the trigger. In this video, we're going to treat that as what it is, the clearest, least ambiguous act of conscience in the franchise, a killer choosing his own death to protect the one person he cannot bear to corrupt. Along the way, we've been mapping every moment where Dexter's plans cracked because he cared. Now we're ready to move scene by scene, season by season, and test that pattern. Was Dexter Morgan ever truly soulless, or was his conscience the one variable he could never fully control or kill? So let's kick things off in Season 4, at what should be the apex of Dexter's career as a hunter. He's finally unmasked the Trinity Killer, Arthur Mitchell. And we watch him glide through a parking lot and into a mall, tailing this man like it's just another flawless plan, in a long line of controlled executions. On paper, this is textbook Harry's code. Identify the killer. Confirm the pattern. Prepare the kill. No feelings, no hesitation, just operational precision. But the second Arthur steps into that crowded mall and folds seamlessly into a scene of suburban normalcy. The psychology of the hunt tilts. Trinity isn't just a phantom ritualist anymore. He's a dad buying ice cream, a husband joking with his wife, a man whose normal life looks alarmingly familiar. We see it on Dexter's face as he watches Arthur with his family. The predator's tunnel vision widens. The focus is not just on the target. Suddenly, it's on the orbit. A wife who doesn't know. Kids who believe their father is safe. It's disturbingly close to empathy, and the show frames it as a direct mirror. Arthur's double life reflecting Dexter's own with Rita and the kids. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these mirrors, because they're where his illusion of control really starts to crack. There's a key beat in the mall where Dexter realizes the tactical problem and the moral problem are the same problem. If he moves too fast, if he grabs Arthur in public or spooks him in the wrong way, those innocents become collateral damage. Emotionally, as their world collapses around a hidden monster. Socially, as the investigation shreds their lives. Maybe even physically, if Arthur feels the net tightening and lashes out at the nearest, weakest targets. To keep this clear, a purely code-driven killer would neutralize the threat at maximum efficiency. Grab Arthur the first time he's alone. End the cycle, except that the shockwaves are unfortunate but inevitable consequences. Instead, Dexter hesitates. He backs off at the first clean opportunity to abduct Arthur, trailing him instead, rationalizing the delay as strategy, learn the ritual, map the pattern, understand the design before dismantling it. But the timing betrays him. That hesitation arrives right after he's seen the family, right after he's watched Trinity play the same role Dexter plays in his own kitchen, at his own dinner table. This isn't just curiosity about the ritual, it's a protective instinct he can't fully blame on the code. He's not only protecting potential future victims, he's trying, in some twisted way, to protect the people who love Arthur from the full, brutal impact of the truth. And that's where the central question of this section lands. Is Dexter's delay a tactical miscalculation, or is it the moment his conscience quietly outweighs the fantasy of the perfect kill? Each major section will show us that when he makes space for innocence, the trajectory of the story bends. Here, by trying to spare Arthur's family from the immediate collapse of exposure, he gives Trinity more time to operate. Along the way, that mercy mutates into something much darker. This blink of conscience doesn't just endanger strangers, it starts a countdown that will reach all the way back into Dexter's own home. Because in Dexter's world, every time his conscience blinks, someone else is already marked to pay the price, and this delay will become the most devastating example yet. And nowhere is that paradox sharper than at a carved turkey and a picture-perfect suburban table. On the surface, it's just Thanksgiving at the Mitchells, Arthur, his brittle wife, his terrified kids, and Dexter sliding into the role of Kyle Butler, the awkward friend who brought pies and secrets. Underneath, this is supposed to be the night, the plan. Trinity, isolated in a familiar environment, with Dexter holding all the angles. To keep this clear, Dexter has done the homework. He's scouted Arthur's routes, clocked the drive from the Mitchell house to his prepped kill site, built a cover story about helping Arthur with some vague church errand after dinner. In terms of Harry's code, this is as close to a perfect operational box as we get in this season. Victim confirmed, pattern established, timing controlled. No random variables, no witnesses. just a clean extraction and a ritual that restores Dexter's sense of control. Except the investigation refuses to stay in its lane. Deb's case is tightening around Trinity at the exact same time. Her questions about the Four Walls killings, her bruised determination after Lundy's death, the way she keeps circling the same shadow Dexter is stalking. She's there, just off screen, like a storm front. If Dexter moves too fast, the blast radius doesn't just hit Arthur. It hits Deb's career, her already shattered psychology, and the fragile trust she still has in the system she serves. Then Arthur detonates at the table. His son drops a plate, and the mask comes off. The room freezes. Arthur's voice turns to acid, his hand clamps down, and we watch a practiced family terror response snap into place. Dexter's eyes don't just go predator calm here, they flicker. He's cataloging abuse patterns, yes, but there's something else. A father seeing the nightmare version of himself, the collapse of the family fantasy he's been chasing with Rita and Harrison. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to these pivot points where the central question isn't can Dexter kill, but what is he willing to destroy to do it? This night answers. Not everything. Not anymore. He can drug Arthur after dessert, drag him to the table he's already imagined, and end decades of violence. But that move risks Deb stumbling into the truth, Rita's illusion imploding overnight, and the Mitchell family exploding in public, their private hell turned into spectacle. So Dexter reframes his hesitation as strategy. He tells himself he's waiting for a cleaner window, a more isolated moment, a lower risk extraction. The focus is not just on operational safety, though. The subtext is screaming that he's doing emotional damage control, triaging Deb's sanity and the Mitchell kids' futures alongside his usual risk matrices. When did the Bay Harbor butcher start weighing feelings against body counts? Earlier seasons make this shift obvious. Back then, if preserving the secret meant lying to Deb, gaslighting Rita, or sacrificing anyone's peace of mind, he did it without blinking. The plan just had to work. Now he's protecting Deb from a truth that would annihilate her, and, in a twisted way, trying to shield Arthur's family from a public implosion they never chose. And that's the cost. Every minute Arthur walks away from that table, more nameless victims are placed in the crosshairs. Dexter's conscience becomes a loaded gun, pointed at people he will never meet. The more he cares about his family, the more strangers die for it. So where does that moral math lead when the next holiday rolls around, and there's still blood on Trinity's calendar? So when the calendar finally turns past Trinity and into season 5, the universe does something cruel. It doesn't give Dexter a new monster to study. It drops a survivor into his trunk. Lumen is the anomaly. She's not a hunter stalking prey. She's the one who got away, shaking, feral, pulled out of those plastic bags, right after Rita's death has already blown a crater in Dexter's illusion of control. His plan is gone, his family fantasy has collapsed, and into that wreckage walks someone who has seen his face at the table and lived. By Harry's code, this is simple. She's a liability. She knows his secret, she's unstable, she's not trained, and Harry's entire psychology playbook is built on one rule: never let anyone into the ritual. To keep this clear, Lumen is everything the code warns against. No vetting, no pattern, no clean exit. We watch Dexter initially treat her like a problem to be solved. He stalks her hospital room. He imagines the needle. There's that scene in the cabin where he genuinely weighs killing her to protect himself. Stalk the target, control the scene, eliminate the risk. But when he actually looks at her, when he sees the way she recoils from touch, the way her voice breaks describing the men, something doesn't line up. She doesn't fit the predator profile he's built his whole investigation style around. This is where the central question shifts. Is Dexter just following a rule set? Or is there a conscience under there, reacting to her trauma? Instead of silencing the witness, he does something the code never anticipated. He believes her. He validates her need for justice. And then, he makes the most dangerous adjustment of his life. He rewrites the code in real time to include her pain. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to those shared kill rooms because they are structurally different from every other ritual we've seen. The plastic is the same. The tools are the same. But the power dynamic has inverted. Dexter keeps asking her, "Are you sure? Do you want to see this? Do you want to do this yourself?" That is the language of consent, not control. He pauses when she hesitates. He lets her decide when to step closer, when to look away. Normally, Dexter's victims are bound, gagged, stripped of any agency before the knife falls. Here, he's almost deferential. Lumen chooses the targets. Lumen sets the emotional pace. Along the way, he's not just eliminating threats, he's trying to repair a moral ledger for someone else, taking on responsibility for her healing that has no tactical upside. We see it most clearly when he offers her an out. He tells her she can walk away from the darkness, that she doesn't have to finish this. From a self-preservation standpoint, this is madness. Letting her go means an uncontrollable witness, an open investigation, a permanent risk. But his conscience is negotiating terms on her behalf, not his. And that's the paradoxical turn. The moment Dexter tries to help rather than just punish, he becomes more dangerous to his own code than any external enemy. If he can bend the rules this far for Lumen, what happens when the people he loves start breaking the rules in ways the code can't justify? By the time we reach the end of Season 5, Lumen isn't just another ally. She's the anomaly in Dexter's entire trajectory. The one person who sees the kill rooms, the knives, the plastic, the code in action, and doesn't recoil, report him, or try to domesticate the monster. She steps into the darkness and meets him there. On paper, Harry would call this the perfect plan. A partner who understands his rituals, shares his targets, and has already crossed the line into complicity. They stalk together, investigate together, execute together. Operationally, it's clean. Emotionally, it's the closest thing to control Dexter has ever felt. Because for once, he isn't lying just to maintain cover, he's known. So why not lock this in? Why not keep the only person who makes his double life sustainable? To keep this clear, we have to sit with Lumen's turning point. After they eliminate Jordan Chase and dismantle the rape ring that destroyed her, there's no next name on her list, no new face to pin her rage on. She wakes up, and the obsessive need for vengeance is gone. The darkness that pulled her toward Dexter has lifted. His hunger is permanent. Hers was situational. That mismatch is the crack that runs through their shared fantasy. Dexter feels it immediately. The central question becomes, does he try to reignite her anger so she'll stay? Or does he let her healing stand as a verdict on what he is? This is the man who once framed Dokes to protect his freedom. The man who used Rita as camouflage without ever giving her the option of informed consent. Yet with Lumen, he doesn't manipulate, guilt trip, or engineer a new threat to bind her to him. He listens when she says, "I don't feel it anymore," and believes her. In that breakup scene by the water, Dexter's language is crucial. He tells her she's done, even if he isn't. The burden is his. The compulsion is his. He doesn't romanticize their bond as destiny. He reframes it as a temporary intersection between her trauma and his pathology. What would it mean for him to insist she keep killing once the need is gone? He recognizes that his presence would drag her backward, re-injuring what little healing she's managed to reclaim. And the stakes are not abstract. Letting Lumen walk away with full knowledge of his identity is a massive operational failure by code standards. If she talks, his life collapses. Deb's life collapses. Harrison's life collapses. Every investigation he's danced around snaps shut in an instant. Harry's training should be screaming, tie up the loose end. Kill her, frame someone, restore control. But he doesn't even seriously entertain that option. The focus is not just on what would keep him safest, but on what would keep her free. Along the way, the code stops looking like pure self-preservation and starts looking like a story he tells himself, one he's suddenly willing to violate for someone else's emotional well-being. And that choice sets a dangerous precedent, because the next time someone knows his secret, he won't get the luxury of a clean, consensual goodbye. And when that clean, consensual goodbye is off the table, the show throws Dexter into one of his strangest experiments in control. Brother Sam, an ex-con, a former killer, standing in front of a baptismal font instead of a blood slide box. On paper, this is a walking violation of Harry's code. Once broken, always broken. No appeal, no parole. Let's kick things off with that contradiction. Brother Sam runs an auto shop, and a ministry built out of men the system has written off. To Dexter, this is initially just another investigation, another target wrapped in religious language. He stalks Sam, digs into his file, lines up the plan. But the more he watches, the less the evidence cooperates. Sam isn't grooming victims. He's bailing out addicts, mediating fights, literally stepping between bullets and the men he's trying to save. The central question becomes unavoidable. If Sam can change, what does that say about Dexter's own supposedly fixed psychology? Sam talks to him about light and darkness, not as fate, but as a daily decision. In the hospital, in the garage, by the water, he keeps insisting that people aren't passengers in their own lives. They choose. They fall. They get back up. For a man who has built his entire identity on being a helpless vessel for the dark passenger, that's not just comforting, it's destabilizing. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on Sam's theology, but on how it rewrites Dexter's internal code. When Sam is shot by Nick, one of the very men he tried to redeem, the old pattern should be automatic. Identify the threat, build the kill room, restore balance. Instead, we get a dying preacher grabbing Dexter's hand and asking for the opposite of justice as Dexter understands it. No revenge, no blood. Mercy, this is a different kind of test. Dexter's instinct screams for retribution. Harry's rules can accommodate that. The dark passenger feeds on it. But Sam's words echo like a second code, one that doesn't need plastic wrap or knives to feel binding. For a brief stretch, Dexter actually tries to honor it. He confronts Nick without a table, without tools, trying to believe that not every betrayal demands a body and bags. It's awkward, halting, almost painful to watch, because we can see the effort. And that's where the collapse comes. Nick laughs, boasts, revels in Sam's death. Dexter snaps and kills him anyway, and the act lands wrong. There's no cathartic ritual, no sense of righteous equilibrium. Just a quiet awareness that he has betrayed something Sam saw in him, an off-ramp he almost took. Along the way, the show makes a paradoxical move. Dexter's brief flirtation with forgiveness makes this failure feel heavier, not lighter. Earlier seasons would have turned an attack on one of his own into gleeful, efficient vengeance. Here, the same outcome feels like a moral backslide. Each major section will keep building on that tension, because this isn't the last time forgiveness will haunt him. The next time he's asked to extend mercy, it won't be to a shooter in an alley, but to the person he most wants to protect, and the one who will break every rule he's ever lived by. The next rupture doesn't come from a rival killer or a botched investigation. It comes from something painfully ordinary, a toddler, a backyard, and a pool. Harrison slips. The splash is small, almost trivial. Dexter is a few feet away, mentally somewhere else entirely, running the angles on his next hunt. No dramatic music, no stalking montage, just a mundane accident that lands like a moral indictment the second Dexter turns and realizes his son is under the water. He runs, he dives in, and for once, there is no plan, no code, no careful choreography. There is only raw, unfiltered terror. This isn't the fear of being caught as the Bay Harbor butcher. It's the animal panic of a father who has failed at the most basic level of protection. When he drags Harrison out and starts CPR, we're not watching a killer manage damage. We're watching a man who suddenly understands that the real consequences of his double life are not hypothetical. The central question in that moment is brutally simple. What if Harrison dies because Dexter was too busy feeding the dark passenger? His inner narration doesn't jump to witnesses, police reports, or how he'll spin this if child services shows up. It fixates on the image of his son, face down in the water, while he was off in his head, constructing another kill room. And the show knows exactly what it's doing, because the visual echo is unmistakable. Water, a helpless body, a parent arriving seconds too late. We can't see Harrison sputtering by the pool without flashing back to Rita in the bathtub. Blood spreading like ink through the water while baby Harrison screams on the floor. That earlier failure was the catastrophic endpoint of Dexter's illusion of control. This near drowning is the quieter aftershock that tells him the same pattern is still alive in his trajectory. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on his fear in the moment, but on what he does after. In the episodes that follow, Dexter pulls back. He rearranges his schedule. He forces the dark passenger to wait so he can do daycare pickups, bedtime routines, the slow, unglamorous work of actually being there. Fatherhood stops being convenient camouflage and starts functioning as a competing identity. Contrast that with earlier seasons, where family life is basically set dressing. He keeps Rita satisfied, attends just enough events, maintains the suburban fantasy as a shield against suspicion. Back then, the home is a prop. Now, after Harrison's brush with death, it's a site of potential collapse, a place where his absence could literally kill his child. Along the way, his internal narration shifts. He wonders if Harrison is better off without him, if his presence is inherently toxic. That isn't tactical self-doubt, it's genuine, moral self-interrogation. He doesn't start shopping for a new cover family or a backup plan. He seriously entertains the idea that his primary obligation is Harrison's well-being, even if that means fewer kills. Less relief, more gnawing tension. In this video, we're going to keep tracking that recalibration, because this is where conscience stops being abstract. Father versus killer. Responsibility versus compulsion. As Harrison grows, that conflict won't just shape Dexter's choices. It will shape the boy watching him, learning from him, and eventually reflecting back the one thing Dexter can't control, what his son decides to become. And then we hit the moment where that reflection stops being hypothetical and walks straight into the kill room. Season 7, The Abandoned Church. Plastic sheeting glowing in stained glass light. Travis Marshall strapped to the table. Dexter standing over him with the knife already raised. By the code, this is textbook, the ritual is set, the evidence is controlled, the threat is contained. And then Deb kicks open the door, gun out, eyes wide, and the entire architecture of Dexter's secret life collapses in a single breath. To keep this clear, under Harry's rules, the priority is simple. Neutralize the target. Secure the scene. Then manage the witness by any means necessary. That could mean lying, manipulating, even restraining Deb, until he can rebuild control around the investigation. The code is logistics disguised as morality, and in this moment, the correct move is to finish the plan and treat Deb as just another variable. But that's not what happens. Dexter freezes. The knife hangs there, suspended between the code and something Harry never planned for. He has a clean window to drive it into Travis's chest. Instead, he lowers his arm and turns toward Deb. For several long, dangerous seconds, a known killer is left alive on the table, so Dexter can try to stabilize his sister's psyche. That hesitation is a failure of procedure and a revelation of conscience. Travis is unpredictable, armed with apocalyptic delusions, and any delay risks escape, attack, or exposure. Yet Dexter's first instinct is not self-preservation or mission completion. It's, what is this doing to Deb? How do I keep her from shattering? That's not the dark passenger talking. That's a brother. Listen to the way he speaks. Calm, direct. I'm a serial killer. No elaborate cover story, no quick improvisation about undercover work or a sting gone wrong. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this kind of brutal honesty, because it's the one thing Deb never asked for and the one thing she needs to make sense of the last 7 seasons of her life. Dexter offers her reality instead of another protective lie. Now, contrast that with Dokes. When Dokes closed in, Dexter's response was framing, gaslighting, and a willingness to let an innocent man carry the Bay Harbor Butcher label into death. With Deb, he does the opposite. No frame up, no scapegoat, just the terrible truth laid bare in a church. Watch Deb's face, horror, betrayal, nausea, and watch Dexter's. His eyes keep flicking to her, not to Travis, not to the exits. The focus is not just on whether he'll be arrested, it's on what this revelation is doing to her sense of justice, family, and self. The central question for him shifts from how do I get away with this to what have I done to her. Along the way in the back half of the season, we see the consequences. He takes fewer risks. He explains his logic. He even agrees, briefly, to stop killing because Deb asks him to. His decisions are no longer made in a vacuum. Deb's pain, her panic attacks, her disgust, all get folded into his internal calculus. This is what it looks like when a conscience entangles itself with another person. Dexter can't move without dragging Deb's morality behind him. And that bond is about to face its ultimate stress test, when the investigation turns inward and Deb has to decide whether the law she swore to uphold matters more than the brother she now knows far too well. When LaGuerta closes in, which side of that line will Deb stand on, and how far will Dexter push her to keep his world from finally collapsing? Deb choosing Dexter over LaGuerta is one fracture. Hannah McKay is the next. Because if LaGuerta forces Dexter to weaponize Deb's conscience, Hannah forces him to admit he actually has one of his own, and that it can be bought. Let's kick things off with who Hannah is on paper. A classic Black Widow silhouette, delicate, blonde, tending plants that double as weapons. A poisoner with a trail of bodies tied to Wayne Randall. A string of accidents and unexplained deaths that fit Harry's code with surgical precision. No vigilante angle, no self-defense loophole, no question that she belongs on the table. In any rational investigation, she's not a temptation. She's a target. Dexter treats her that way at first. He digs through case files, reconstructs old crime scenes, tracks toxicology reports. We watch him build the usual plan, stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room. Every step is about control. Plastic, restraints, a single knife. By the time Hannah is strapped down, the ritual is intact, the code satisfied, and the outcome, by all of Dexter's psychology and precedent, should be inevitable. But the central question in this moment is not whether she's guilty. It's why he stops. Hannah doesn't plead. She doesn't bargain. She looks at Dexter, reads the room, and essentially says, "I know what you are." She accepts the kill as if she's been expecting this trajectory her entire life, and then she does something far more dangerous than fight back. She tells him they're the same. That's the crack. He hesitates, not because she's innocent, but because, for once, the person on his table sees him more clearly than the ghosts in his head. Harry's code, Deb's loyalty, Rita's idealism, none of them ever mirrored his darkness without flinching. Hannah does. And in that instant, the focus is not just on justice or procedure. It's on Dexter's hunger to be understood. So he starts bending reality to match that feeling. She only kills people who hurt her. She's not hunting random innocents. She can stop. Their connection is rare, valuable, maybe even stabilizing. Each excuse is a quiet rewrite of Harry's rules, a way to keep the code while gutting its core. To keep this clear, nothing about Hannah's profile is softer than Miguel's, Lila's, or even Trinity's wife. Dexter has executed people in similar gray zones without blinking. What's changed isn't the standard, it's who he's willing to exempt. And that has consequences. By letting Hannah walk out of that room, he knowingly unleashes a calculated killer back into Miami, implicitly accepting that any future victims are an acceptable cost for his emotional comfort. Then, he escalates the failure. He doesn't just spare her. He sleeps with her, dates her, folds her into his home, and, by extension, into Harrison's life. Love and poison share a kitchen. This is a conscience, but it's corrupted by intimacy. Dexter's empathy is no longer reserved for innocence or for Deb's pain. It extends to someone who reflects his own monstrosity, blurring his internal lines between right and wrong, until self-protection, desire, and mercy are indistinguishable. Along the way, the paradox hardens. The more he learns to love, the more people he's willing to risk. And that sets up the next collapse, because when the person you love is also the person you should kill, every choice becomes a betrayal of the code, of past victims, or of your own heart. So when Hannah's presence starts colliding with Deb, with LaGuerta's investigation, with Dexter's already crumbling control, which part of himself will he sacrifice next? So when Hannah and Deb finally collide, Dexter's fantasy of balance doesn't just wobble, it detonates. We move from abstract risk to a literal attempt on Deb's life. And suddenly, the question isn't whether Dexter can keep his plan intact, it's whether he can live with what he's already allowed to happen. Let's kick things off with where Deb is, psychologically, in this stretch of the season. She's already carrying the weight of the church, the truth about Harry's code, the Bay Harbor Butcher investigation, circling back, and the realization that her entire life has been an accessory to Dexter's lies. Then, Hannah enters that orbit, a poisoner with no code, no ritual, no guardrails, who kills when she feels threatened. For Deb, this isn't just competition for Dexter's affection. It's an existential threat. Another predator moving freely through Miami because Dexter says she's different. The car crash strips away any illusion that this can be contained. Deb's brakes fail, her car sails off the road, and we're left with that image of her bleeding and disoriented, surrounded by twisted metal. No kill room, no neat tableau, just chaos. In that moment, the central question isn't whether Hannah can be managed, it's whether Dexter has already failed the one person he swore to protect. He knows Hannah has a history with Digitalis. He knows Deb confronted her. The investigation he runs is almost a formality. His gut has already reached the verdict. And that's where the internal conflict hits its peak. Dexter loves Hannah. He sees her as his equal. someone who understands his darkness without flinching. He's already bent the code for her, rationalized past murders as survival, treated her as an exception to the rules that supposedly define his morality. Turning her in doesn't just threaten his happiness, it exposes the collapse of that special exemption he carved out in his own psychology. To keep this clear, look at the mechanics of what he does next. He doesn't kill Hannah. He doesn't flee with her. He methodically collects evidence of the poisoning, builds a case airtight enough to put her away for life, and hands it to the police. He is, step by step, engineering his own heartbreak. And he knows it. The confrontation that follows is brutal because it's quiet. Hannah realizes he's the one who betrayed her, and Dexter can't hide the pain. He frames it as something he had to do, not to protect his secret, but to protect Deb. That distinction matters. Hannah, in prison, is a massive liability. She knows everything about him. She has every reason to be vengeful. From a pure survival perspective, this is a terrible plan. But that's the point. The focus is not just on operational control here. It's on conscience overruling desire. Dexter is willing to risk exposure, to lose the one person who gets him, because Deb could have died and might still be in danger if Hannah walks free. The same darkness that once made him spare Hannah now becomes the reason he cages her. When that darkness touches Deb, everything recalibrates. Along the way, we're watching a tragic symmetry solidify. He once chose Hannah over the code. Now he chooses Deb over Hannah, over safety, over his own myth of invincibility. And this pattern, Deb's safety as the override switch, won't stop here. It's going to scale up into a final, conscience-driven decision where the cost isn't a relationship or a lover's trust, but Dexter's entire life as he knows it. And that brings us back to an earlier inflection point, long before Iron Lake, where Dexter's conscience doesn't just protect innocence, it reaches across the table to another killer. Season 7. Miami, a mob enforcer named Isaac Serco steps off a boat, and the investigation frames him as exactly what Harry's code was built for: a ruthless predator who needs to be removed from the board. On paper, the plan is simple. Identify Isaac as the Koshka Brotherhood's cleaner, confirm his body count, neutralize the threat before he reaches Dexter, or anyone Dexter cares about. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. But Isaac doesn't move like a standard monster. He isn't playing for territory, money, or status. He's hunting Dexter personally. And he's willing to walk straight into police surveillance and sniper scopes to do it. To keep this clear, we watch a classic cat and mouse dynamic slowly deform into something stranger. Isaac studies Dexter's psychology with unnerving precision, deducing there's more than coincidence behind Victor Baskov's disappearance. Dexter counters, sabotaging Isaac's plans and dodging assassination attempts, expecting the usual collapse. The enemy overreaches, the code justifies the kill. Order is restored, except the central question starts to shift. Why is Isaac taking these risks? What is he actually grieving? The answer lands in a quiet bar, not a kill room. Isaac and Dexter sit across from each other, guns within reach, and talk about love. About Victor. About the way lost tunnels through even the most carefully constructed persona. Isaac describes a partner, not a disposable underling. Dexter recognizes that language. He's heard it in his own head about Rita, about Harrison, about the few people who ever cracked his shell. In this video, we're going to keep returning to moments like this, where the focus is not just on blood, but on the attachments that destabilize Dexter's claim to pure monstrosity. From that point, Isaac stops reading as a typical target and starts functioning as a tragic mirror. His violence isn't just domination, it's devotion, weaponized. When Isaac is finally mortally wounded in a shootout, he doesn't beg for his life or offer leverage. He asks Dexter to help him die peacefully, away from the Brotherhood, so he can be with Victor in the only way he has left. Dexter could walk away. He could let Isaac bleed out, exploit him as a bargaining chip, or turn him over to the very enemies closing in. Instead, he honors the request. No plastic, no photos, no lecture about the code. What Isaac gets looks less like an execution and more like a vigil, an acknowledgement that even a mob killer can love so completely that his entire trajectory bends around grief. And that choice has consequences. By granting mercy, Dexter entangles himself deeper with the Koshkas, taking on new enemies purely because he chose compassion over control. It's the paradox hook of this phase of his life. The more he recognizes humanity in other monsters, the less effective he becomes at being the monster who only kills monsters. Along the way, we're watching the code lose its clean, on-off logic. If Isaac can be both killer and mourner, who else qualifies? That question will only get louder as Dexter keeps meeting reflections of himself he can't quite bring himself to destroy. If Isaac is a mirror Dexter can walk away from, LaGuerta is the mirror he can't escape. We go from philosophical questions about who counts as a monster to a concrete, claustrophobic answer. A shipping container, a gun, and a Bay Harbor butcher finally cornered. Let's kick things off with that image. Metal walls. Plastic sheeting. The same kind of box where Dexter's entire trajectory as a killer began. Only this time, he's the one exposed. LaGuerta has followed the investigation all the way back to its origin point, piecing together the blood slides, the marina, the pattern Harry's code was supposed to keep invisible. The plan is not to understand Dexter. The plan is to stop him. Dexter's response is pure cold design. He lures LaGuerta to the container, drugs her, and stages the scene so it will look like she was the real Bay Harbor butcher. A frame job, not a kill room. No ritual, no trophies, just character assassination. He's willing to let an innocent woman die disgraced, so his myth of control survives. This is the code stripped down to its ugliest subtext, his safety over everyone. Then Deb walks in, and the psychology of the scene flips. LaGuerta is on the ground, begging Deb to see what's in front of her, throwing every piece of evidence and every instinct she has at the one person who might still choose the badge over her brother. Dexter stands between them with the gun, offering the quick, brutal solution that would make the whole problem disappear. But when he turns the gun on LaGuerta, something breaks. His hand shakes. His voice cracks as he tells Deb he can't do it, that he's done, that he'll turn himself in. To keep this clear, this is not Dexter buying time or manipulating the room. This is Dexter, for the first time, voluntarily considering prison, exposure, and the end of his killing, rather than put a bullet in someone who doesn't fit the code at all. The central question here isn't whether he has feelings, it's whether his conscience can ever outrun the machinery Harry built. In that hesitation, we watch a new line appear. No more innocent blood, even if everything else collapses. The code never demanded that. His conscience does. And that's exactly when Deb's plan, such as it is, collapses. She realizes there is no version of this where everyone lives. If Dexter turns himself in, his life is over. If LaGuerta walks out, his life is over. So she makes the one choice he won't. She raises the gun. She pulls the trigger. LaGuerta dies not for the code, but for Dexter. Dexter's reaction is not relief. He doesn't immediately pivot into damage control. He's horrified, frozen in the knowledge that his failure to act morally has dragged Deb across a line she can never uncross. Along the way, we've been asking whether Dexter has a conscience. After that shot, the question mutates into something darker. Even if he does, is it already too late for it to matter? Season 8 will treat that container as the point where both of them start falling, with no clean way to hit the ground. Season 8 answers that too late question by bringing in the one person who claims it was never a question at all. Enter Dr. Evelyn Vogel, cool, clinical, and introduced as the secret architect behind Harry's code. She doesn't just know Dexter's psychology, she helped design the container he's been living in. From the moment she shows him those childhood drawings and old case files, Vogel frames herself as the ultimate investigation into who Dexter really is. In her words, he's a born psychopath, no real empathy, no genuine guilt, just violent urges that Harry and Vogel learn to channel into a productive plan. The code, in this telling, isn't a moral awakening, it's plumbing. And Dexter, exhausted and reeling from LaGuardia's death and Deb's collapse, initially leans into that story. It's a relief. If he's broken by design, then the central question of responsibility disappears. Harry didn't fail him. He didn't fail Deb. The world simply failed to understand what he is. For a few episodes, we watch him almost relax into Vogel's language, repeating that he can't feel, that he's different, that this is just maintenance. But then the cracks start to show. To keep this clear, look at the roll call of people she can't account for. Deb, Harrison, Rita, Lumen, Hannah. Dexter remembers Deb cradling him in the shipping container, Harrison in his arms after Rita's murder, Lumen choosing to leave once her need for vengeance is satisfied, Hannah sparing Deb despite every reason not to. These aren't abstract case studies. They're emotional landmines his pure psychopath label keeps stepping on. We see him push back in conversations with Vogel, insisting that he cares what happens to Deb, that he feels responsible for what she's become. When Vogel suggests Deb is collateral damage, an unfortunate but expendable variable, if she threatens Dexter's stability, he doesn't just disagree. He recoils. The woman who helped write the code has just offered the perfect utilitarian solution, and he rejects it viscerally. In this video, we're going to keep noticing that pattern. Every time someone hands Dexter a clean, detached plan, his conscience drags him toward the messier option. He chose to turn in Hannah once, even though she understood him. He nearly surrendered to clear LaGuardia's name, fully aware that it would collapse his carefully managed double life. He let Lumen go instead of clinging to the one relationship that made his killings feel almost justified. Do those look like the moves of a man with no inner moral pressure at all? The focus is not just on Vogel's diagnosis, but on how Dexter consciously decides to side with his lived experience over her script. The more he insists he's not what she says he is, the more catastrophic his moral choices become, especially where Deb is concerned. And that's the irony Season 8 leans on. The scientist who engineered his code can't see his conscience, while the people he's damaged most are walking evidence that it exists. By the time we head into the final stretch, Dexter is staring at a new trajectory. If he isn't a pure psychopath, then he has to start acting like the person his conscience insists he could be, even if that means walking away from the very life the code was built to protect. And that's exactly where Deb explodes the illusion. Because once LaGuardia is dead on that shipping container floor, Dexter's conscience doesn't just show up in his own nightmares. It shows up in Deb's complete collapse. We open on a Deb who is not just shaken, but obliterated. She's drinking on the job, snorting lines in her car, sleeping with suspects, and circling that one obsessive belief that every terrible thing she's ever done is because of Dexter, and every terrible thing he's done is because she helped him. The investigation into LaGuardia's disappearance fades into background noise. The real crime scene is Deb's psychology. At first, Dexter treats it like any other containment plan. He checks in, tracks her movements, tries to intercept her before she wanders into an internal affairs trap. He hides bottles, drags her out of bars, steers conversations away from the Bay Harbor butcher. To keep this clear, he's still thinking in terms of exposure, not healing. Deb is a variable, a liability, a leak to be plugged. But then we hit the turning point. The central question stops being, how do I keep Deb quiet? And becomes, how do I keep Deb alive? When she tells him she wishes he'd died in that container instead of LaGuerta, when she can't look at Harrison without breaking, Dexter realizes this isn't a logistics failure. This is a soul-level collapse. Control over the narrative won't fix a sister who no longer wants to exist. So he does something we almost never see. He starts spending his nights trying to repair a psyche instead of a crime scene. He pushes her toward therapy. He sits in waiting rooms. He encourages her to tell the truth about how she feels, even when that truth is that she hates him. He even flirts with the idea of confessing more fully, of laying out the whole code and every body, if that's what it would take for her to process what happened. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this shift, from managing evidence to managing consequences. Contrast that with Dokes locked in a cage, Rita kept in the dark, Harrison's trauma held at arm's length. With them, Dexter's plan is always the same: preserve the secret, minimize variables, move on. With Deb, he does the opposite. He moves toward the fire. The dock scene makes that explicit. Deb, high and hollowed out, drives them straight into the water, openly choosing mutual destruction over living with what they've done. When they surface, Dexter doesn't neutralize her, doesn't cut ties, doesn't fake her death to seal the leak. He doubles down on trying to pull her back from the edge, even as every hour spent on her recovery is an hour he's not hunting, not planning, not patching the Bay Harbor butcher mythology. The focus is not just on a brother helping a sister. It's on a killer accepting that his existence has psychological blast radius he can't mop up with plastic and bleach. Along the way, the more he tries to save Deb's soul, the more he drags her through new lies, new bodies, new lines crossed, until a clean break is impossible. And that irony sets up the final tragedy. Because Dexter's conscience isn't done with Deb. It's winding toward a moment where the only way he can answer it is with a sacrifice, and once again, she'll be standing at the center of his collapsing world. That sacrifice line isn't abstract. It lands in the most literal, horrifying way when Deb is lying in a hospital bed, not as the furious detective we've known for 8 seasons, but as a body, ringed with tubes and machines. From a bullet in a manhunt to a stroke on the operating table, Deb's entire trajectory collapses into beeping monitors and a flat affect. To keep this clear, the sequence is brutally simple. Deb is shot during Dexter's pursuit of Saxon, survives long enough for surgery, and we're told she's going to be okay. Then, a clot, a stroke, and suddenly, the investigation board's brightest line is effectively gone. No higher brain function, no meaningful response, just the hum of life support, doing what her body can't. We watch Dexter move through that sterile room like it's a kill space he never planned. He talks to her, narrates over her, trying to reconcile the woman who once screamed at him in parking lots with this still, slack face. The focus is not just on the medical reality, but on his psychology as he stares at the ventilator. This is Deb, the one person who always forced him to confront consequences. Reduced to a system he can't fix, hack, or outthink. And then he makes a decision. No knives, no plastic, just fingers on a switch and tubes gently pulled away. He frames it as mercy, as freeing Deb from a life she would never have chosen, and on one level, we believe him. This is a woman who defined herself by action, by rage, by choice. Would she want to exist as a permanent patient, trapped in a bed while Miami moves on without her? But here's the central question. Who gets to answer that? Deb never gave explicit consent. She never said, "If I end up like this, let me go." Dexter is doing what he's always done, taking control, making the unilateral call. He insists it's for her, yet he's also silencing the one voice that might still judge him. Along the way, his motives blur. Love is in there, absolutely. So is crushing guilt over the chain of failures that led to this room. Every glance at her is a reminder that his plan to keep her close, to keep killing, and keep his family, ended in neurological ruin. Is he ending her suffering, or ending his own inability to look at what he's done? Contrast this with his usual kills. Those are wrapped in the code, justified as justice, balance, necessity. This looks different. It sounds like mercy, but it carries the same finality, the same private tribunal where Dexter is judge, jury, and executioner. And unlike Lagerta or Dokes, there is a real alternative. He could walk away, let the machines keep Deb technically alive, visit her, live with the failure and the weight. Instead, he chooses the clean break. He chooses the one outcome that removes the daily reminder. The image that follows is one of the most haunting in the series. Dexter wheeling Deb's body out of the hospital in a stolen gurney, pushing her into the teeth of a hurricane, and lowering her into the ocean like any other wrapped, anonymous victim. Mercy and murder become indistinguishable, swallowed by the same dark water. In this video, we're going to sit with that paradox. Is this Dexter's first truly selfless act, or the most selfish kill he's ever committed, disguised as love? And what does that answer do to the last shreds of his conscience in the finale that follows? We move from the quiet horror of Deb slipping beneath the waves to Miami itself, bracing for impact. Sirens, boarded windows, a sky the color of a bruise. On Dexter's boat, the slice of life, Deb's body is wrapped in a white sheet like any other trophy, except we know it isn't. Harrison is already gone, shipped off on a last-minute flight, while Dexter turns the wheel toward a horizon swallowed by the oncoming hurricane. In this video, we're going to sit with Dexter's narration in that moment, because it's the closest we get to a closing argument from his conscience. He tells us that everyone he loves dies because of him, that the pattern is undeniable. Rita in a bathtub, LaGuardia in a shipping container, Dokes framed and blown up, Deb on a ventilator. From his perspective, the investigation is over, and the verdict is in. His very existence is the common denominator, the failure in the system. So, he makes a plan. Send Harrison to Hannah, a woman he once stalked as a target, a poisoner with her own body count. Then steer straight into the storm and let the world believe the Bay Harbor butcher went down with his boat. On paper, this is Dexter's final application of the code. Choose the lesser evil, minimize collateral damage. In practice, he's deciding that being raised by a killer is still safer than being raised by him. What kind of psychology leads you there? To keep this clear, we have to remember how many seasons Dexter spent insisting the opposite. He told himself that Harrison changed his trajectory. That love made him more than the dark passenger. He built a family with Rita, fought for custody, even imagined teaching Harrison a modified code one day. The focus is not just on his words, but on the actions. Staying in Miami when leaving would have been safer, bending his rituals so he could make it to school events, killing to protect Deb and the kids. Now, in the hurricane, that entire narrative collapses. The central question becomes, is he sacrificing himself, or just fleeing the consequences, finally catching up. He doesn't face a courtroom for La Guerta. He doesn't admit to Deb's role in his world. He doesn't submit to any real legal control. Instead, he stages a death so clean it erases the need for accountability, then calls it protection. Is that conscience or cowardice wearing a martyr's mask? Each major section will show how Dexter's sense of responsibility keeps mutating, and this exile is a crucial mutation. The bearded lumberjack we see in the finale is not living a glamorous escape. No kill room, no blood slides, no color, just isolation, routine, and a deliberate refusal to connect. It plays like a self-imposed purgatory, his conscience's verdict that he doesn't deserve happiness, doesn't deserve Harrison, doesn't deserve another chance to fail. And yet, along the way to New Blood, a question lingers like that storm on the horizon. If this punishment is real, if his conscience truly wants him gone, why does Dexter eventually step back into the light and back into Harrison's life, knowing exactly how much damage he leaves in his wake? And that question lands us right in front of one of the strangest fractures in Dexter's supposed self-image as a monster with rules, Hannah McKay. When Hannah walks into the investigation in Season 7, she is, on paper, a dream target for the Code, a Black Widow-style killer with a confirmed trail of bodies, a history of using poison as a weapon, and a documented partnership in a cross-country murder spree. From a forensic standpoint, from Harry's checklist, from everything we've been told to trust, she is a clean, justified name for Dexter's table. So let's kick things off with Dexter's mindset. At first, he approaches Hannah clinically. He digs into old case files, reconstructs crime scenes, cross-references her testimony with the evidence, stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room. This is supposed to be routine, another problem to solve, another plan to execute with total control. He even rehearses her death in his head, talking through the inevitability of what has to be done, as if he's already halfway to wrapping her in plastic. Then the first crack appears. During the investigation, Dexter starts to see more than a pattern of homicide. He registers childhood trauma, survival in an abusive relationship, and, crucially, the absence of sadistic pleasure in her kills. Hannah doesn't hunt because she loves pain. She kills to eliminate threats, to stay alive, to keep her autonomy. The focus is not just on what she's done, but why. And we watch his internal narrative shift from she's a target to she's a mirror. Someone whose darkness has a psychology he understands. That all converges in the greenhouse confrontation. It is the perfect setup, secluded location, prepped tools, a victim alone with him among fragile, living things. Dexter has every opportunity to kill her cleanly. No witnesses, no loose ends. Instead, he hesitates, he interrogates, he tests her story, her fear, her desire to keep living. And then, in the moment that should have been the syringe, he chooses intimacy over execution. This is where the central question hits. Is that conscience, an unwillingness to extinguish a complex, damaged life, or pure narcissism? Dexter falling in lust with someone who reflects his own darkness back at him? Is he protecting Hannah, or protecting the part of himself that wants to be seen, understood, even loved by another killer? To keep this clear, we need to look at what happens next. When Deb confronts him, Dexter doesn't admit, I broke the code because I wanted her. He rewrites the code itself. He insists Hannah no longer fits the rules, that her current behavior and motives somehow exempt her. This is not a logistical exception or a tactical delay. He is consciously bending the only moral framework that ever constrained him. And that's the paradox. The moment he breaks Harry's design may be the moment he proves he has a conscience, however twisted. Unlike earlier passes driven by strategy, Dexter spares Hannah in full awareness of her crimes and the risks she poses. He is willing to endanger Deb, his investigation, and his own safety, rather than erase this one complicated life. Along the way, that decision quietly rewires his trajectory. By letting Hannah live, Dexter isn't just cheating on the code, he's demonstrating that his inner voice can overrule it, that fragile emerging conscience will not stay contained. And the consequences of that override are going to bleed into every relationship that comes next. And that's exactly where the triangle hardens into a problem he can't finesse away. On one side, Deb, the damaged, furious, still fundamentally moral cop, who now carries the truth of what he is. On the other, Hannah, the intoxicating partner in darkness, who offers a life with no judgment, no code, no limits. In the middle, Dexter, still clinging to the fantasy that he can keep control and protect both. To keep this clear, Deb isn't just the sister who knows. She's the last tether to any external standard of right and wrong. She frames Dexter's violence as something that has to be contained, explained, managed. Hannah does the opposite. She reframes it as liberation. So when Deb sits across from Dexter and begs him to put Hannah on his table, she's not asking for revenge. She's staging an intervention. She calls Hannah a threat, points to the investigation, points to the pattern of bodies, and insists this is about safety, about consequences. Dexter hears all of that, and we can feel the split. He knows Hannah has killed to protect herself. He's watched her poison, manipulate, and erase obstacles with the same calm efficiency he prides himself on. At the same time, she's the first person who looks at his darkness and doesn't flinch. No horror, no conditions. That psychological acceptance is powerful. It warps the calculus. Suddenly the plan isn't just follow the code. It's, can I bend the code enough to keep the one person who actually sees me? Then the road curves, the car spins, and Deb's life almost ends in a shallow canal. The image is brutal: shattered glass, twisted metal, Deb dazed behind the wheel. She suspects Hannah almost immediately. Dexter's first instinct is denial, because admitting it would mean admitting his choice to spare Hannah has bled directly into his sister's lane. But the failure of his denial shows on his face. The illusion that he can compartmentalize collapses right there in the wreckage. From that point, his conscience stops whispering and starts dictating. He can no longer tell himself this is about the code or about Harry's design. It's about the simple fact that his desire for Hannah nearly got Deb killed. So he flips the script. Instead of shielding Hannah from the system, he quietly starts constructing a new plan, help bring her down. He collects the poisoning evidence, nudges the investigation, and essentially engineers her arrest. In the interrogation fallout, we're watching a betrayal that doubles as a confession. Dexter is sacrificing the one relationship that promised him freedom from judgment. For what? For Deb's continued existence, and for the faint chance that he can live with himself. Is that love, guilt, or conscience? The central question almost doesn't matter. Because his behavior finally aligns with moral responsibility, he acts as though he is accountable for the damage his choices cause. Along the way, he creates something else, a furious, wounded killer who now has nothing left to lose. Hannah walks out of that betrayal with a new mission. Dexter has proved he can choose like a man with a conscience, and in doing so, he's just armed his darkest lover with a reason to come back and burn his carefully managed life down. Hannah walking away with a vendetta feels like a turning point, but Dexter's conscience doesn't just show up in romantic entanglements. It surfaces in something colder, stranger, and much harder for him to explain. A fire he doesn't set, and a life he doesn't want to take. Let's kick things off with the Phantom Arsonist investigation. A city on edge. Families waking up to walls of flame instead of alarm clocks. Entire homes reduced to blackened skeletons, while the news cycles through the same phrase, serial arsonist. The system needs a name, a face, a clean narrative. And when they land on a convenient suspect, everyone relaxes, except Dexter. At first, he almost does. Arson isn't his territory. No plastic, no blades, no ritual. He walks the charred ruins as a technician, not a savior, more fascinated by burn patterns and accelerant traces than by the people who died screaming inside. The focus is not just on the horror, it's on the puzzle. Another case file. Another pattern to decode. Emotionally, he's on autopilot. Then the pattern breaks. Dexter starts seeing seams in the story, accelerant traces that don't match the suspect's supposed methods, ignition points that contradict the timeline, a nervous confession that feels rehearsed instead of haunted. To keep this clear, Dexter's entire psychology is built on evidence. When the evidence lies, he reacts. That familiar itch kicks in, the same one that warned him about Brian, about Miguel, about Trinity. Something is wrong. Here, the wrongness isn't a hidden killer. It's a hidden innocence. The man they've pinned as the Phantom doesn't move like a predator. He flinches at crime scene photos. He parrots back details that only the cops have been feeding him. Dexter realizes the real arsonist is still out there, and if the plan holds. The justice system is about to manufacture a monster out of a frightened bystander. This is where the trajectory shifts. He's not invoking the code to justify another kill. He's stepping outside it to prevent a different kind of execution. No stalking, no kill room, no trophies. Instead, we watch him quietly sabotage the investigation, recontextualizing lab results. Nudging Batista toward alternate ignition sources, planting doubt where certainty used to live. The same skills he uses to frame the guilty are now being weaponized to free the innocent. It's a moral inversion. The Bay Harbor butcher becomes, for one brief arc, the only person in the room insisting that close enough is not justice. If Dexter were truly just a monster playing by rules, why bother? Why risk exposure to save a stranger, when hunting down the real arsonist would still satisfy the code and preserve his cover? In this video, we're going to keep circling that question, because this is the paradox that haunts every later failure. Along the way, Dexter doesn't just fail as a killer in control, he starts failing as a protector who wants to be more. And the closer he edges to that accidental heroism, the more catastrophic his eventual collapse will have to be. And nowhere is that failed heroism more unsettling than with the woman who literally helped design his mask. When Dr. Evelyn Vogel walks into Season 8, the show doesn't just add another consultant to the investigation. It resurrects the origin story of the code itself. Here is the neurologist who advised Harry, the so-called creator of the code, strolling through crime scenes with a calm smile, dissecting Dexter's psychology like a proud scientist, and at the same time, like a twisted mother cooing over her favorite child. She understands his darkness faster than anyone since Brian. But instead of recoiling, she calls it perfect. To keep this clear, the brain surgeon arc is not built like a normal hunt. We're dealing with a killer who removes sections of victims' brains, packages them, and delivers them directly to Vogel. The threat is intimate from the first trophy on her doorstep. This isn't Dexter tracking a pattern in Miami Metro's case files. It's Dexter watching someone declare war on the only person who claims to truly accept what he is. That's where the central question shifts. Is Dexter just eliminating a rival predator, or is he trying to keep his mother alive? Early on, he frames it as a plan to neutralize a dangerous outlier who's taunting their investigation. But the focus is not just on maintaining control of the situation. We watch him become visibly rattled when Vogel is followed, when her house is breached, when surveillance fails. The urgency doesn't look procedural. It looks personal. He abandons other priorities to rush to her, repeatedly, from racing across town when she vanishes from her own home, to barging into scenes where she's alone with the suspected killer. Dexter's usual methodical triad, stalk, confirm, prepare, collapses into something messier. He makes noise. He takes risks. He compromises the perfect kill room timing because Vogel might be in danger right now. What self-described monster does that? Their conversations keep poking holes in Harry's original diagnosis. Vogel insists he's incapable of real feeling and that this makes him an ideal application of her clinical theory. She calls him the perfect psychopath, the model outcome of her code. But when Dexter pushes back, when he asks if she ever wonders what that did to him, there's a flicker of conscience that makes him visibly uncomfortable. He doesn't just want to be effective. He wants to know if he's wrong about himself. And here's the moral knot. Vogel helped build the system that licensed his killings. Yet Dexter feels compelled to protect her, as if saving her might retroactively justify the experiment. Every failure to catch the brain surgeon in time doesn't just read as a tactical misstep in the investigation. It plays as a moral failure to safeguard the person who claimed his darkness could be used for good. When Vogel finally dies in front of him, that illusion dies too. His plan to be both weapon and protector collapses in a single throat cut, and we're left with Dexter's worst fear made literal. Even when he tries to act like a man with a conscience, everyone he chooses to protect ends up dead. So what happens when that pattern lands on the one person he was never supposed to endanger at all? In this video, we're going to watch that question move from Vogel to Deb to Harrison and finally to Iron Lake, as every new attempt at protection drags Dexter closer to the one consequence he can't control. So when that pattern finally slams into Deb, it doesn't arrive in the abstract. It walks in with a name, a face, and a surgical toolkit. Oliver Saxon. The real brain surgeon. On paper, he's the perfect code kill, sadistic, methodical, and directly responsible for turning Dr. Vogel's creation into a horror show. We watch Saxon dismantle Dexter's fragile circle with clinical precision. He toys with Vogel, stalks Deb, leaves bodies that feel less like trophies and more like messages. To keep this clear, Saxon isn't just another monster Dexter found in a file. He's the living consequence of the entire experiment that produced Dexter in the first place, now circling the few people Dexter still allows himself to care about. Early on, Dexter's plan is almost comfortingly familiar. Identify the killer, confirm the pattern, put him on the table. Saxon becomes the logical endpoint of the investigation, the final puzzle piece that will restore control. If Dexter can take this one man out, he tells himself, he can purge the danger, protect Deb and Vogel, and maybe finally step off the treadmill of blood. Then Saxon shoots Deb. 1 second, they're closing in. The next, Deb is on the ground, bleeding out because Dexter chose to keep playing Hunter instead of pulling everyone out of the game. In that moment, the investigation collapses into something raw and personal. Dexter's pursuit stops looking like code enforcement and starts looking like revenge. He's not just tracking a target, he's chasing the man who turned his "I can protect you" promise into a lie. This is where the psychology shifts. In this video, we're going to keep asking where Dexter's conscience actually lives. And with Saxon, the answer gets messy. Once Saxon is finally arrested, sitting behind glass and handcuffs, The system, for once, actually has the monster. Theoretically, Dexter's work is done, yet he hesitates. Does he let the law handle it, risking an outcome he can't script, or does he reassert control, the only way he knows? The interrogation room kill is the breaking point. A pen, a sudden lunge, a staged self-defense stabbing that plays on camera like a desperate cop stopping an attack, but to us reads as a calculated execution. No plastic, no ritual, no blood slide. It's not a code kill. It's Dexter forcing the universe to give him the ending he wants. And the central question lands hard. Is he killing Saxon to protect anyone, or to silence the man who embodies his failures with Vogel, with Deb, with the entire brain surgeon trajectory? The focus is not just on the body, on the floor, but on how empty Dexter looks afterward. There's no relief, no righteous satisfaction, just a widening void. By the time Saxon is dead, Dexter's conscience doesn't feel cleansed. It feels broken. And that fracture is exactly what opens the door to the catastrophic choice he's about to make with Deb's life, and with his own. And then we're in the Ikkyo, where there are no kill rooms, no plastic, no plan Dexter can hide behind. Just fluorescent light, the hiss of a ventilator. Heart monitors ticking out Dexter Morgan's life in cold, indifferent beeps, while Dexter stands there with empty hands. The image is brutal. Deb small in the bed, tubes everywhere, her face bruised. Dexter in street clothes, not scrubs, not a lab coat, stripped of every symbol of competence. This is the one environment he can't dominate with a syringe or a scalpel. The hospital is an investigation he can't manipulate, a system that doesn't care who he's killed, only what her CT scan shows. And that loss of control is exactly where his conscience rushes in. To keep this clear, we have to rewind the trajectory that put her here. He protected Hannah. He engaged Saxon directly. He dragged Deb back into homicide, back into his orbit, convincing himself each move was rational, necessary, even protective. Shield Hannah from extradition, neutralize the brain surgeon, give Deb purpose again. In his head, it all tracked. But in this room, every rational choice replays as moral failure. Each step that once felt like strategy now looks like negligence with a body count. Listen to the way Dexter talks in those hospital scenes. The voiceover drops the usual technical language. No talk of patterns, no dark passenger mythology. Instead, he circles one idea. He is the common denominator. When he admits, out loud, that his presence has poisoned Deb's life, it's not a performance for anyone else. It's a confession to himself. The code doesn't come up, because the code can't explain this. Harry's rules were supposed to contain the monster. They never accounted for collateral damage like this. The contrast is almost cruel. Doctors discuss swelling, oxygen levels, prognosis. They outline best and worst case scenarios with clinical detachment. Dexter hears a different verdict. Every tragedy, from Brian to Rita to LaGuerta to this bed, traces back to him. When a surgeon says, "We'll see how she responds," Dexter isn't waiting on Deb's brain. He's waiting on a moral sentence. Is there any universe where she wakes up and his existence is still justifiable? That's why the line about Deb being his one good thing lands like a collapse, not a hallmark moment. He isn't indulging in self-pity, he's doing a brutal accounting. If the only uncontaminated piece of his life is now broken because of him, what does that make him? Not a necessary monster, not a vigilante hero, just the epicenter of harm. And the central question snaps into focus. If Dexter truly lacked a conscience, would he be this destroyed? Would he be this still, this shattered, instead of already planning his next hunt? Along the way, his conscience stops being background noise and starts demanding payment. The more awake it becomes in that IQ, the more it pushes him toward a sacrifice that will redefine what kind of monster he really is, and what atonement could possibly look like for someone who finally believes he doesn't deserve his one good thing anymore. And that's how we arrive at the most paradoxical moment in the entire series, the kill that proves Dexter's conscience by destroying the one person it cares about most. He walks into Deb's EQ room alone. No Harrison, no Hannah, no hospital staff hovering in the doorway. Just Dexter, fluorescent light, and a body that used to be the only anchor in his collapsing world. He knows exactly what he's about to do. There's no investigation to outmaneuver, no Bay Harbor butcher case to contain, no code to hide behind. This isn't a plan, it's a sentence. To keep this clear, watch his hands. He doesn't reach for a knife or a syringe. He moves to the machines. Fingers on switches, eyes on Deb. He silences the alarms before they can scream, shuts off the ventilator, pulls out the tubes. Each motion is slow, deliberate, almost reverent, and it clashes violently with the clinical precision we've seen in every kill room. On his tables, he's detached. Here, he's breaking. He cradles her as the life drains away. No plastic wrap, no trophies, no ritual. Just Dexter holding his sister, whispering to a woman who can't hear him, while the flatline hums under everything. From a purely procedural angle, this is a failure of the code. From a psychological angle, it's the clearest expression of something Harry never planned for: genuine, unbearable love. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this moment as the endpoint of Dexter's moral trajectory. The focus is not just on the fact that he ends Deb's life, but on the calculus behind it. He isn't removing a threat or eliminating a monster. He's ending the suffering of the person he loves most, admitting that keeping her alive in this state would be selfish. What does it mean when the Bay Harbor butcher finally chooses someone else's dignity over his own need to keep them close? The scene refuses to give us any sense of release. There's no triumphant score, no darkly comic quip, no rush of victory, just quiet, suffocating acceptance. This is the price of every rationalization, every body in the ocean, every time he told himself he could juggle murder and family without consequences. And that's the paradoxical mercy at the center of this act. For Deb, it's a release from a world he ruined. For Dexter, it's a life sentence. He's guaranteeing that he will carry the image of her last breath forever. Along the way, the show flips his usual dynamic. Instead of sacrificing others to protect his secret, he sacrifices his last emotional lifeline to protect her from the fallout of his secret. The central question is brutal. Does this cross a new moral line, or finally prove that there was always a conscience under the code? Compared to his earlier kills, there's no satisfaction, no ritual, no illusion of control, just raw guilt, forcing him into the one act he never wanted to face. And once he walks out of that room, there's nothing left to protect or justify. Which is why his next move, the hurricane, lands less like an escape plan and more like a self-authored execution, the final attempt to erase the man who pulled that plug. So when we cut from Deb's hospital bed to that storm-churned ocean, it doesn't feel like a change of scenery. It feels like a sentence being carried out. Dexter at the helm, rain carving lines across his face, waves hammering the bow as he steers straight into the hurricane. This is not a daring escape. This is a man driving his own life into a shredder. To keep this clear, we have to listen to what he's telling himself. Over that howling wind, his internal narration finally drops the last of the mythology. He runs the investigation of his own life and reaches a brutal verdict. Everyone he has ever loved ends up dead, damaged, or permanently warped because he exists. Rita in the bathtub, Deb bleeding in the shipping container, Harrison on blood-soaked floors he never chose. Again and again, the pattern is the same. This is where the code completely collapses as a moral shield. Harry's rules were supposed to channel the monster, to minimize collateral damage, to make Dexter believe he was doing something like good. But in that storm, he admits what the seasons have already shown us. No number of right kills can balance out the consequences of his double life. The code doesn't cover Deb's bullet, or Rita's terror, or Harrison's nightmares. It only covered his need to feel in control. Remember, he had another plan on the table. Run away with Hannah and Harrison. New names, new town, fresh trajectory. On paper, that looks like the happy ending version of Dexter. The monster choosing family over blood. But the focus is not just on what he wants. It's on what he finally believes he deserves. Steering into the hurricane is the opposite of that fantasy. Instead of choosing selfish happiness, he chooses disappearance. Oblivion over intimacy. In his own twisted psychology, this is the ethical move. Dexter concludes that he is the real threat, not the killers he hunts. Serial murderers are episodic. He is a permanent contamination. So the most moral act available, in his mind, is not another carefully wrapped body on a table. It's removing himself from the equation entirely. On the surface, abandoning Harrison reads as the ultimate selfishness, a father vanishing rather than facing the truth. But if we stay inside Dexter's logic, there's a warped altruism running underneath. He genuinely believes Harrison is safer thinking his dad died a hero in a storm than ever learning that his father was the Bay Harbor butcher who got Deb killed. Is that protection, or one last lie weaponized as love? And that's the central question of this whole sequence. Are we watching cowardice masquerading as conscience, or the first time Dexter actually sacrifices what he wants for someone else's long-term well-being? He's not saving himself here. He's condemning himself to a life without anyone. Along the way, the show plants one final sting. The lumberjack reveal in New Blood proves he survived the storm, but it also proves something more disturbing. You can sail into a hurricane, fake your death, change your name, but a conscience like his doesn't just wash away with the wreckage. It follows him into the woods, waiting for the next collapse. We cut from hurricane-torn waters to stillness. Snow, pine trees, a deer track disappearing into the white. On the surface, Iron Lake looks like the opposite of Miami, and that's the point. Dexter has exiled himself to a landscape that feels frozen in place, as if motion itself is dangerous. In this video, we're going to treat Iron Lake as a crime scene of a different kind. The blood is mostly in Dexter's head now. The gun shop, the bar, the police station where Angela works, they're all part of a new ritual. He's Jim Lindsay, the mild guy who sells rifles, obeys every regulation, and jokes about background checks. No late night stalking, no plastic wrap, no kill room. Just a man who looks like he's following a plan of total control. But watch his routines closely. The morning runs through snow-covered woods, the strict avoidance of anything that looks like an investigation. The way he tracks his own impulses, the way he used to track targets. He isn't free. He's on a kind of psychological house arrest, supervised by a conscience that finally woke up and refuses to let him pick the lock. To keep this clear, the dark passenger hasn't vanished. It's been buried under something louder and more relentless, guilt. The faces it throws at him are not victims on a table. They're Rita in the bathtub, Deb on the hospital bed, Harrison crying in a pool of blood that should have been Dexter's. Every time he even flirts with the idea of killing again, the show cuts to those internal ghosts. And the fantasy of a safe kill collapses before it can fully form. The focus is not just on what he doesn't do, but on how he overcorrects. Around the townspeople, especially Angela, he leans into transparency and kindness with almost suspicious enthusiasm. He volunteers information. He plays the supportive boyfriend. He helps her investigation, even when it risks putting him near evidence. It's the inverse of Miami Dexter, who hid everything from Deb. Now he's performing honesty as if radical openness could cancel out what he used to be. Along the way, paranoia becomes the clearest expression of his conscience. Every police siren is a potential reckoning. Every missing person case threatens to intersect with his past. Is this a reformed man, or someone so terrified of consequences that he mistakes fear for morality? That's the central question New Blood keeps pressing on. Has he grown, or is he just too traumatized to trust his own code anymore? And the paradox hook is brutal. The calmer Dexter's life looks, the more obvious it becomes that his conscience is doing all the heavy lifting, holding back urges that haven't actually gone away. The longer he maintains the Jim Lindsay mask, the more pressure builds beneath it, setting up an inevitable collision between who he pretends to be and who he still is. That collision takes human form when Harrison walks into Iron Lake, the one person he failed most, arriving to test whether this new, conscience-driven Dexter can survive real contact with his past. Harrison stepping off that Greyhound in Iron Lake is not just a plot twist. It's Dexter's past stepping off the bus, putting on a backpack, and staring him in the face. The mask of Jim Lindsay doesn't get peeled off by an investigation or a slip-up. It gets peeled off by a teenage boy who looks at him and silently asks, "Where were you?" The reunion is staged like a collision. Harrison is taller, sharper, with that guarded, hollow look we recognize from Dexter's own flashbacks. Dexter freezes. For a second, there's pure joy. The fantasy that his plan to disappear somehow didn't permanently destroy his son. Then the dread hits. Every year he abandoned Harrison. Every bedtime he outsourced to someone else. Every lie he'll now have to stack on top of that original disappearance just to pretend this new life is under control. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on the hug at the bus stop. It's on Dexter's immediate guilt response. Instead of basking in the second chance he's supposedly been given, he's running contingencies in his head. What name did I use? What did Hannah tell him? How do I keep him safe without admitting that I blew up his entire childhood to protect myself? The code has no chapter for this. There's no plastic wrap for emotional consequences. Their early conversations play like a low-key interrogation. Harrison asks about Rita, about why Dexter vanished, about why everyone told him his father was dead. Dexter's answers are evasive, half-truths wrapped in a new alias. And for once, those lies don't feel like tactical brilliance. They feel like moral failure. We can feel his conscience grinding against the performance, because every deflection is less about outsmarting an enemy and more about betraying a son who just wants a straight answer. As they circle each other, parenting gets reframed through that conscience. Dexter is less afraid of Harrison discovering the kill rooms than he is of discovering the damage. What if the nightmares Harrison carries are already his fault? What if the trajectory was set the moment he left that baby in a pool of blood and walked away? That fear spikes when Harrison shows his own darkness. The hallway confrontation with the bully, the disturbingly precise retelling of the school attack, the way he talks about justice with a cold clarity that feels way too familiar. Dexter isn't thrilled to have found a proc. He's horrified. It's like watching his own origin story reboot in real time, only this time he knows exactly where that path leads. And that's where the central question lands. Does Dexter have any right to pass on a code? Harry tried to weaponize one damaged child in the name of control, and we watched that experiment collapse over 8 seasons. Dexter abandoned his son, then wants to step back in as moral architect? On what authority? In this video, we're going to keep tracking how, from this point on, every choice Dexter makes with Harrison is haunted by that conscience. What to reveal, what to hide, when to step in, and when to let Harrison make his own calls. He knows one wrong move could doom his son to the same fate, and the more Harrison pushes for honesty, the more obvious it becomes that the lie of Jim Lindsay cannot survive. Not with this kid, not with this level of pressure. Along the way, we'll see that Dexter's real collapse in New Blood isn't operational at all. It's ethical. His conscience simply won't let him keep pretending forever. So when Dexter finally cracks and starts talking to Harrison, it's not just a father opening up. It's a late-night seminar in weaponized guilt. We get those quiet scenes in the cabin, the backyard, the truck after a crisis, where the two of them trade stories about rage and urges, like they're discussing a family allergy. That's the training dynamic, shared secrets, whispered confessions, and Dexter carefully drip-feeding pieces of his past under the banner of understanding, not confession. To keep this clear, Harry's original lessons were delivered from a place of clinical distance. Harry pointed Dexter at crime scenes, at police files, at the investigation process, and said, "This is how you avoid getting caught." It was logistics first, psychology second, morality barely an afterthought. Dexter, with Harrison, flips that order. He stresses choice. He insists Harrison doesn't have to kill at all. He talks about consent, about lines you don't cross, about only acting when you're absolutely sure. We can see the conflict on his face every time he admits what he is. The man who once boasted about control now keeps circling back to restraint. And then he does something Harry never really did. He tries to retrofit a conscience into the code. When Dexter tells Harrison you only go after people who truly deserve it, he's not just reciting rules. He's replaying Rita, Deb, and every collateral victim in his head. He talks about the families of victims, about the ripples of consequences that follow a kill. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to that paradox, Dexter using a serial killer's operating manual as a harm reduction tool. It's like he's patching morality onto a system that was always about control and containment. But Harrison doesn't hear the guilt. He hears the permission, the power. The code, for him, is a way to make sense of his own anger, to justify it, to weaponize it. He latches on to the "they deserve it" clause like a teenager discovering a legal loophole. The restraint, the self-loathing, the horror that now haunts Dexter, that part doesn't transfer. How could it? Harrison hasn't lived through the Bay Harbor butcher, Rita's death, Deb's collapse. He's inheriting the framework without the scars that made Dexter question it. This is the generational misfire. Each major section will show us a pattern where Dexter's attempts at responsibility become the next failure point, and here it's explicit. The central question almost writes itself. Can a man who has spent his life rationalizing murder credibly teach his son about moral responsibility? Or is the very act of teaching the code just another way to keep his worldview alive? Is this love? Or is it legacy building in disguise? Because the tragedy is that Dexter's conscience is finally loud. He's desperate to protect Harrison from the monster narrative Harry gave him, but the only tools he knows are the code and a lifetime of rationalizations. Along the way, we feel Harrison's admiration curdle into doubt. Each revelation makes him pull back a little more. By the time he starts comparing what Dexter says to what Dexter actually does, we can feel the turn coming. Harrison may end up judging Dexter more harshly than Dexter has ever judged himself, and that verdict is closer than Dexter thinks. And then The show rips away Dexter's last excuse in the most brutal way possible, an escape attempt that doesn't just fail tactically, it fails morally. We move from Harrison's quiet suspicion to a concrete image Dexter has spent his whole life avoiding, an innocent man dying by his hands, with no code, no plan, no story he can tell himself that makes it right. Dexter in the holding cell is not the composed Bay Harbor butcher. He's pacing, calculating, feeling the investigation closing in. The walls of Iron Lake are shrinking. Angela has the evidence, Harrison is wavering, and for once there is no backup identity, no convenient scapegoat, no ocean. This is the collapse of the fantasy of control he's been clinging to all season. If he doesn't get out now, the narrative he's built for Harrison and for himself ends in a mugshot and a needle. So he does what he's always done when the pressure spikes. He improvises. He calls Logan in, plays the concerned father, asks to hear Harrison's voice. It's manipulation as survival instinct. But Logan isn't a Dokes, a Brian, or a Miguel. He's a decent cop, a wrestling coach, someone Harrison actually respects. The focus is not just on Dexter's danger here, it's on the fact that this is the exact kind of man the code was supposed to protect. To keep this clear, the show stages the confrontation in seconds. The key, the gun, the lunge. Logan pulls his weapon because that's his job. Dexter grabs him because that's his reflex. And then, in one horrible, efficient movement, he snaps Logan's neck against the bars. No stalking, no research, no confirmation of victims, just pure self-preservation detonating the last safeguard Harry ever tried to install. The camera lingers on Dexter's face and Logan's body for a beat that feels like an accusation. There's no plastic, no trophies, no speech about deserving it. Just a dead man on a concrete floor and Dexter staring at what he's done as if even his own psychology can't spin this fast enough. Is this justice? Is this the dark passenger? Or is this exactly what Deb and Harrison have been afraid of? A killer who will sacrifice anyone when cornered. In this video, we're going to keep returning to this moment because it retroactively infects everything that came before. If Dexter can kill Logan to save himself, how different is he really from Trinity smashing a stranger's skull in a bathtub, or Miguel using Dexter's lessons to settle personal scores? The central question stops being, does Dexter follow the code? And becomes, was the code ever anything more than branding for a serial killer who liked to feel righteous? Along the way, every earlier rationalization starts to sound thinner. Logan's body isn't just a casualty of an escape. It's the moral corpse of Dexter's entire belief system, cooling on the jailhouse floor. And Harrison is about to walk into that aftermath and see, in one glance, the truth Dexter has been running from his entire life. So when we cut from Logan's body to that clearing in the woods, the show doesn't just change locations. It strips away every layer of Dexter's control. Snow on the ground, breath hanging in the air, trees like silent witnesses. Father and son facing each other with a rifle between them. This isn't a kill room. It's an execution ground that Dexter didn't plan and can't escape. To keep this clear, the confrontation unfolds almost like an internal investigation made external. Harrison lays out the case. Logan's death isn't an accident. It's the latest entry in a trail of bodies that follows Dexter from Miami Harbor to Iron Lake. Rita, Deb, LaGuerta, the anonymous men wrapped in plastic. The lies about why they had to die, why the code made it necessary. Harrison names the pattern. Wherever Dexter goes, lives collapse. Friends, colleagues, lovers, children, every relationship is contaminated by that same self-justifying myth. Dexter's first instinct is reflexive. Explain, contextualize, reach for the code one last time, as if it's still a shield instead of Exhibit A. He talks about only killing killers, about saving people, about channeling the dark passenger so innocents are spared. In this video, we're going to keep coming back to this gap between what Dexter tells himself and what the world actually experiences. Here, Harrison slices straight through the story. If this is justice, why are the good people the ones who keep ending up dead? The central question lands like a verdict. What does any of that matter if Logan died begging for his life with a bullet in his head? That's the breakpoint. We watch Dexter's usual defenses stall out. He starts to argue, then stops. The rhythm changes. His face drops, his shoulders loosen, and he does something we almost never see him do in any season. He agrees. He tells Harrison he's right. He admits he's become exactly what he always claimed he wasn't, not a necessary monster, just a killer who brings destruction. And then, the most honest line of his life, he says he doesn't want to die, but he understands that he has to. That's not the dark passenger speaking. That's conscience, raw and unadorned, finally breaking through the code's procedural language. He isn't calculating an escape plan or angling for sympathy. He's recognizing that the only proportionate consequence left is his own death. What follows is even more unsettling. Dexter doesn't just passively accept the rifle. He helps Harrison. He positions himself. He talks him through it emotionally, almost like he's guiding a first hunt in reverse. The focus is not just on a son killing a father, but on a father deciding that this final act of accountability is the only clean legacy he can leave behind. So, is this suicide by son, or the purest expression of Dexter's conscience we ever see? Along the way, the show has flirted with both readings. But as Dexter falls into the snow, the paradox resolves. His conscience, denied for a lifetime, finally dictates a choice, and that choice is what kills him. Dexter dying by Harrison's hand gives us the cleanest image of conscience winning. But that snow didn't fall out of nowhere. It's the endpoint of a trajectory that starts way back with a man insisting, over and over, that he feels nothing, while his behavior keeps betraying him. Let's kick things off in those early seasons, where Dexter clings to Harry's code like a script for someone who doesn't trust his own psychology. He calls himself a monster, a hollow thing, a predator in human skin. Stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room, leave no evidence. The plan is simple, clean, controlled, and yet, from the start, he's breaking his own myth. He protects Deb. He softens around Rita and the kids. He bends timelines, risks exposure, and ruins perfect kills, because these people matter. The central question is, if there's no conscience, why do those exceptions keep multiplying? Brian is the first major crack. Dexter chooses Deb over the brother who promises total acceptance. That isn't the code talking. Harry never wrote a rule for kill your own flesh and blood to save your foster sister. Then, Rita's murder detonates his fantasy that he can keep family and darkness in separate boxes. The Bay Harbor Butcher investigation forces him to see that his ritual isn't just a private outlet. It's a public catastrophe, with bodies, widows, and headlines. Along the way, each relationship adds new weight. Dokes turns from obstacle to almost victim, and Dexter hesitates, refusing to kill him directly, even when it would solve everything. Lumen appears as a mirror of righteous vengeance, and Dexter lets her go when her need to kill ends, honoring a boundary the code never anticipated. With Hannah, he literally rewrites the rules, sparing a woman who fits his criteria because he recognizes trauma and a shared sense of damage. To keep this clear, the code starts as external control: Harry's voice, Harry's lines, Harry's rules. But as the seasons progress, We watch Dexter argue with it, interpret it, twist it to protect innocence. By the time Deb learns the truth, his decisions are no longer procedural. Every potential kill carries a second question. What will this do to Deb, to Harrison, to the people still standing in his blast radius? That shift is slow, messy, and paid for in blood. Guilt over Rita. Horror at Deb's unraveling. The way Harrison's presence turns every plan into a calculation about what kind of father he is pretending to be. These aren't sudden revelations. They're accumulated consequences pressing down until denial collapses. In New Blood, when Harrison calls him out, on Matt Caldwell, on Logan, on the trail of bodies stretching back to Miami, Dexter finally stops hiding behind Harry. The man who once said he had no feelings accepts that he deserves the consequences. So was the code ever really in charge? Or was it just scaffolding built around a conscience that refused to die? The focus is not just on a monster pretending to be human, but on a man using monstrosity as armor. Eventually, the armor cracks. The conscience underneath demands the truth, and that demand is what kills him. And that's where Dexter becomes truly unsettling. A pure, empty predator would be easier to file away, easier to forget. The nightmare is that he isn't empty. There is something in him that recognizes harm, that hesitates, that grieves, even as he keeps sharpening the knives. A Dexter with no conscience would be simple, a slasher villain with a procedural twist, a walking code, executing a plan. Stalk the target, confirm the evidence, prepare the kill room, if that were all he was. The series would play like a stylized investigation into forensics and logistics, but the power of Dexter comes from how often he fails to live up to his own rules, how frequently his feelings interrupt the ritual and send the trajectory of his life into collapse. Think about the moments we've already traced. Sparing Lumen because he recognizes her trauma. Letting Hannah live, then protecting her, even as he knows she's a killer. Throwing away the perfect Bay Harbor Butcher exit strategy the second Deb is in danger. Choosing exile after Rita's death instead of doubling down on the code. In New Blood, accepting death at Harrison's hands because he finally believes Harrison's moral judgment is sound. Each of these is a failure of the monster he claims to be, and a success of something much more human. Every time that conscience flickers, the central question stops being, is he evil? And becomes, what do we do with a person who is both evil and capable of love? The focus is not just on his actions, but on the psychology behind them. We're forced to confront the idea that morality can coexist with monstrous behavior, that someone can feel genuine remorse and still repeat the same crime. That's not a horror movie creature. That's a warped version of us. And here's the paradox that makes the story linger. The more Dexter cares, the more damage he does. Protecting Deb pulls her into cover-ups, then into murder, then into her own grave. Wanting a family with Rita paints a target on her back. Loving Harrison turns Iron Lake into a war zone. His conscience is both a redeeming trait and a source of tragedy, because every time he follows it, someone else ends up paying the price. In this video, we're going to keep circling that weaponized empathy. The series makes us root for Dexter's better angels, then punishes everyone around him when those angels win. Is a person defined by their worst actions, their intentions, or their capacity for remorse and change? To keep this clear, Dexter's conscience doesn't absolve him, it condemns him. He knows better. He keeps killing anyway, right up until he finally can't live with it. What haunts us isn't the blood, it's the recognition that someone can be loving and lethal, protective and predatory in the same lifetime. In the end, Dexter Morgan isn't terrifying because he has no conscience. He's terrifying because deep down, he clearly does. and it still wasn't enough. So if Dexter is terrifying precisely because he does have a conscience, we have to zoom out and ask, when did that conscience actually take over from the code? When did the neat architecture of Harry's rules collapse into something messier, more human, and much harder for Dexter to control? To keep this clear, we can reframe the entire series as a long migration from external control to internal conflict. Early on, Harry's code is everything. Dexter talks about it like software running his psychology: stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room. No guilt, no doubt, just procedure. But even in Season 1, the cracks are already there. He abandons perfect plans the second Deb is in danger. He compromises evidence when an innocent is on the line. For a man who insists he doesn't feel, he keeps acting like someone who's afraid of causing the wrong kind of harm. That's the paradoxical thesis running underneath the whole trajectory. The more Dexter insists he has no conscience, the more his actions prove the opposite. He spares Lumen once he understands her trauma. He hesitates with Hannah when the investigation says she's a killer, but his gut reads something more complicated. These are not code calculations. These are empathy glitches, little failures of the monster persona that reveal an actual moral center trying to emerge. Then, the mid-series relationships hit, and the stakes shift from logistics to consequences. Rita isn't just cover, she's the first person whose pain genuinely devastates him. Her murder isn't a clean narrative beat in his plan, it's a collapse. He blames himself, obsesses over Harrison's safety, and for the first time, we see grief that can't be filed under operational failure. Deb, meanwhile, becomes the central question he can't code his way out of. Every time he chooses her over the perfect kill, every time he risks exposure to keep her alive, he's answering that question with his actions. She matters more than the ritual. Even Dokes, the relentless investigation that should only be a threat, turns into a moral mirror. Dexter could let Leela's frame job stand without a second thought. Instead, he's haunted by the fact that an innocent man died for his secret. The focus is not just on the body count, it's on the specific people whose lives are shattered around him, and his growing inability to shrug that off. By the time we reach New Blood, Harry's code is basically a ghost. Dexter is still killing, still telling himself a story about control, but every choice is tangled with remembered faces: Rita, Deb, Harrison, Dokes. Each major section of his life now plays back as a ledger of emotional debt. When Harrison confronts him, Dexter doesn't just fear prison. He fears being seen, accurately, by the one person whose opinion now defines him. In this video, we're going to lean into that final shift. Because in Iron Lake, Dexter isn't merely breaking the code, he's finally forced to live inside the full emotional fallout of everything he's done, and that's where the last illusion dies. If we zoom out from Iron Lake and run the whole series like an investigation board, another pattern snaps into focus. Every time Dexter's monster is supposed to stay on script, it keeps drifting toward people, and that drift keeps blowing up his plan. Let's kick things off with the smaller, early fractures. In Season 1, Dexter is adamant. He doesn't care about innocence. He cares about the code. Yet he spends whole nights clearing wrongly accused suspects, tweaking evidence, and quietly steering the Miami PD away from the wrong men. That's not operational necessity. That's a killer who cannot tolerate the collateral damage his own myth says he shouldn't even notice. From there, the compromises escalate. He covers for Rita's addiction and her abusive ex, not because it protects his cover, but because he's furious at the idea of her being hurt again. He spares a child who witnesses one of his kills. He walks away from clean opportunities to eliminate threats when Deb is in the blast radius. These are terrible strategic choices. They're great human ones. The focus is not just on isolated acts of mercy, but on how consistently he lets them sabotage his survival strategy. Hannah McKay is the most obvious contradiction. By the code, she is a justified target, multiple bodies, clear pattern, ongoing danger. Instead, Dexter hesitates, investigates her psychology, and then lets her live. He even protects her from law enforcement. Emotionally, it makes sense. Tactically, it's a collapse. She becomes another unpredictable variable who can expose him at any moment. With Harrison, the stakes jump again. Dexter's original plan is simple: keep the life, keep the code, keep the kid at a distance. But after Rita's death, every instinct bends toward protection. He moves, lies, and reshapes his entire trajectory around the idea that Harrison might grow up different. Each major section of Dexter's life after that is defined by this tension. The code says isolate, the conscience says attach. And then there's Deb. Over and over, he throws away perfect exits to shield her. He could let Dokes take the fall cleanly, but he keeps intervening to manage Deb's emotional collapse. He confesses in the church, not as a last resort, but as a catastrophic act of honesty that detonates his operational control. When she kills Lagerta to save him, that's not random tragedy. That's the accumulated weight of every time Dexter chose Deb's psyche over his own safety. By New Blood, the pattern is undeniable. Sparing suspects, protecting Hannah, centering Harrison, sacrificing Deb's career and sanity, and finally accepting death rather than warp his son's morality, these are not glitches in a monster's operating system. They're the rough, painful outlines of a conscience that keeps interrupting the code's cold efficiency. So the central question becomes, if Dexter keeps choosing people over the perfect kill, what does that do to the fantasy that he's a pure predator? In the next section, we'll track how those choices don't just humanize him, they systematically destroy every structure he built to stay in control. If the conscience is real, it has to live somewhere. It can't just be a voiceover. It has to show up in the people Dexter can't ignore, the ones who drag him out of the abstract safety of the code and into actual consequences. To keep this clear, we can think of 4 mirrors: Rita, Deb, Harrison, Hannah. Each one reflects back a different angle of Dexter's humanity. And each one makes his plan to be a pure predator a little less believable. Let's kick things off with Rita, the accidental moral baseline. In Season 1, Dexter chooses her precisely because she's damaged, timid, and sexually withdrawn. She's supposed to be camouflage, a cover story. But her innocence and vulnerability do something Harry's training never could. They force Dexter to rehearse goodness so consistently that the performance starts to leave a mark. Packing school lunches, assembling furniture, going to Narcotics Anonymous meetings to support her recovery, these aren't in the code. They're in the messy, domestic space where empathy sneaks in through repetition. When Rita is murdered, the collapse is total. Dexter doesn't just lose cover, he loses the life that accidentally taught him what safety feels like, and his grief exposes that he was far more attached than his own psychology allowed him to admit. If Rita is the baseline, Deb is the brutal truth teller. She loves him, she admires him, and then the investigation peels that away. From walking into the church as he kills Travis to discovering Harry's role in shaping the code, Deb forces Dexter to see his choices through someone else's breaking point. Her panic attacks, her disgust, her desperate attempts to redirect him into therapy or confession, these moments corner him. He can't hide behind monsters, don't get to feel bad, when Deb is visibly disintegrating in front of him because of what he is. Every time he alters evidence to protect her, every time he chooses her over the perfect kill, we watch his supposed control give way to a conscience that prioritizes her pain. Then Harrison arrives, as the inescapable legacy. A baby crying in blood at the end of season 4, a kid growing up around knives and lies, and finally, a teenager in New Blood, asking the central question, what does it mean if I'm like you? Dexter's fear of creating another him becomes one of the only consistent brakes on his predatory impulses. He moves, he hides, he tries to quit, not because the urge is gone, but because Harrison watching him would make the lie intolerable. When Harrison calls out the hypocrisy of the code, Dexter's entire trajectory is exposed as a generational threat, not just a personal quirk. Hannah is the seductive exception, a killer who understands him, who doesn't demand shame, who offers a life where the investigation stops at their front door. She tempts him with an escape hatch from guilt, but even there, his conscience bleeds through. He spares her, protects her, chooses her as Harrison's caretaker, yet he cannot fully abandon Deb, Miami, or the wreckage he's left behind. Every choice around Hannah is split. One eye on the fantasy of freedom, one eye on the people already broken by him. Along the way, these 4 mirrors turn Dexter's life into a hall he can't escape. Every turn reflects back the same uncomfortable truth. His capacity to care is real, and it keeps sabotaging the monster he's trying to be. In the next section, we'll see how that caring doesn't save him. It becomes the exact pressure that finally snaps his world in New Blood. Those mirrors don't just expose Dexter's capacity to care, they expose something Harry never planned for. The more Dexter feels, the less the code actually works, and the fantasy of a controlled monster starts to look like the most dangerous lie in the entire series. Let's kick things off with Harry's original design. On paper, the code is clean: kill only killers, don't get caught, protect the innocent as a side effect of precise control. In Harry's imagination, that creates a necessary evil, a surgical instrument cutting out society's tumors. But the second Dexter starts bending those rules for people he loves, the instrument slips. The focus is not just on who he kills, it's on who he refuses to sacrifice, even when the code demands it. Think about Dokes. By the code, Dokes is innocent. The necessary evil narrative says Dexter should accept capture rather than kill a good man. Instead, he lets Leela solve the problem, watches her murder Dokes, and then covers it up. That's not the cold logic Harry trained. That's a man protecting his life, his sister, his son's future, at the cost of an innocent. The controlled monster collapses into something messier, a killer with attachments, picking outcomes based on guilt and fear. We see the same fracture in Season 4. Dexter keeps Trinity alive far longer than the code allows because he's chasing an emotional fantasy, a serial killer who balances family and murder without everything falling apart. That investigation into Trinity's psychology isn't about justice, it's about hope. And the consequences are catastrophic. Rita dies. Harrison is left in blood. A code-driven, clean kill early on would have saved them. Dexter's conscience, his yearning and curiosity, is what gets them killed. To keep this clear, look at the pattern. His guilt-driven confessions to Deb, his attempts to rescue Lumen, his protection of Hannah, his desperate need to keep Harrison from becoming him in New Blood. Over and over, he abandons the perfect plan. He alters evidence, spares potential targets, runs toward emotional fires he should avoid if he truly believes he's only a predator. Each major section of his life becomes defined not by the code, but by the moments he overrides it. And those overrides are lethal. Deb's life unravels because Dexter chooses her feelings over clean exits. Hannah's survival drags him into new crimes. In Iron Lake, his attempt to redirect Harrison's rage into a better version of the code ends with an innocent cop dead in the snow. Is that really a necessary evil? Or conscience without wisdom, flailing in real time? By the end, Dexter has clearly outgrown Harry's rules. He recognizes real innocence in Harrison, real wrongness in his own trajectory. But he never builds a stable moral framework to replace the code. He's suspended between monster and man, guided by a conscience he doesn't know how to use, and that tension is exactly what the central question of this video hangs on. In the next section, we'll watch how that unresolved conscience finally forces the one choice the code never imagined, Dexter accepting that the world might need him to stop existing. That unresolved conscience finally cashes its check in the snow outside Iron Lake. A gun between father and son. No kill room, no plastic, no plan. Just Dexter Morgan facing the one investigation he can't manipulate, Harrison's judgment. To keep this clear, let's kick things off with what actually happens in that finale. Dexter is exposed not as a vigilante hero, but as the Bay Harbor Butcher reborn. He kills Logan in a frantic escape attempt, shattering his own narrative that he only harms monsters. And when Harrison calls him out on Rita, on Deb, on everyone who bled so he could keep the code alive, Dexter doesn't run. For the first time in the entire trajectory of the series, he doesn't look for an angle, a new identity, or a cleaner story. He kneels. He agrees. He tells Harrison, explicitly, that he's right. The central question is this a sudden moral awakening, or the final, brutal consequence of years of tiny recognitions piling up? From Brian on the table to Dokes, in that cage to Deb in the church, Dexter has been collecting evidence against himself. Each season adds another data point that his presence means collateral damage, Rita dead in the bathtub, Astor and Cody abandoned, Lumen broken and then discarded, Hannah forced into exile with Harrison. The pattern is clear long before the cabin in New Blood. Dexter is the common factor in every collapse. So when Harrison points the gun at him, Dexter is not discovering guilt for the first time. He's finally believing the verdict he's been dodging. All those moments where he protected Deb over the perfect kill, where he spiraled after Rita's death, where he clung to Harrison as the one person he wanted to keep safe, those weren't glitches in his psychology. They were the slow emergence of a conscience that had nowhere stable to land. And Harrison is both judge and victim. That's the horror. Dexter thought he was protecting Harrison by killing for him, by turning that wrestling rage into a guided outlet. But what is that, if not grooming? He's not saving Harrison from the dark passenger. He's onboarding him into the code. In this video, we're going to keep returning to that distinction, protection versus recruitment. When Harrison sees Logan's body, he understands the truth Harry never did. Violence in Dexter's hands doesn't stay contained. It spreads. That's why Dexter's death isn't framed as clean redemption. There's no triumphant score, no illusion that one bullet balances the ledger. Instead, it plays as the first truly selfless choice he ever makes. He stops negotiating. He stops fantasizing about a new town, a new cover, a new season of killing with better rules. He tells Harrison to pull the trigger, because the only way to protect his son now is to end the pattern, not preserve himself or his dark passenger. So we're left with something deeply unsettling. Dexter's most moral act is also his most violent, and it's aimed at himself. Is that justice, or just another form of damage? In the final section, we'll sit with that discomfort and ask what it means for us that the closest thing to a happy ending this story can offer is a world where Dexter Morgan is finally gone. And that's where the story quietly turns back on us. Because if Dexter's most moral act is killing himself through Harrison's hands, the central question isn't just, was that justice? It's why did we spend 8 seasons and a revival rooting for the man who made that choice. From the first plastic-wrapped kill room to that final snowy clearing, Dexter's conscience functions like a mirror. We watch him rationalize, negotiate with his code, bend rules he swore were absolute. And in those extreme calculations, we recognize softer versions of our own compromises, the corners we cut, the harm we reframe as necessity, the guilt we file away as a cost of doing business. His psychology is exaggerated, but the pattern feels familiar. The show knows this, and weaponizes our craving for neat justice. Early on, it makes the plan look clean. A monster who only kills worse monsters. Stalk the target. Confirm the victims. Prepare the kill room. No messy investigation. No legal loopholes. No procedural failure. When Dexter takes out Brian, Trinity, or a child killer the system missed, we feel a surge of satisfaction. Didn't he just do what the courts couldn't? Didn't control finally beat chaos? But along the way, the consequences start to bleed through the plastic. Rita in the bathtub. Dokes in that cabin. La Guerta on the dock. Every deserving kill leaves a wake of people who were never on the table. And the show forces us to sit with the collapse of our fantasy. There is no such thing as violence with perfectly contained fallout. What's telling is how we react whenever Dexter's conscience interrupts the script. When he spares Lumen because he sees her trauma instead of a file of victims, we exhale. When he lets Hannah live, when he throws away a perfect kill to save Deb, when he refuses to let Harrison become his apprentice in New Blood, we feel relief. Why? Because we never fully believed the pure monster narrative he sold us. Some part of us was always watching for proof that he could choose a human response over a perfect plan. To keep this clear, the focus is not just on who Dexter kills, but on when he doesn't. Those hesitation beats, those moments where he accepts emotional consequences instead of operational control, are where we quietly reframe him from predator to tragic struggler. We don't excuse him, but we start to empathize with the part of him that wants to be more than his damage. So maybe our fixation with Dexter was never really about the blood or the ingenuity of the code. In this video, we're going to treat his entire trajectory as an extreme version of something we all do, keeping moral questions safely abstract until reality drags them into our living room. Watching Dexter is watching someone fail, loudly and catastrophically, at a negotiation most of us conduct in silence. In the final section, we'll press that one step further and ask what it means that our big catharsis arrives only when the story removes him from the world and leaves us alone with what we cheered for. So once the blood dries, the investigations close, and the last body hits the floor in Iron Lake, what are we left with? Was Dexter Morgan ever more than a ritual wrapped in a code? Or did an actual conscience claw its way through all that plastic and precision? The central question we've been circling is deceptively simple. Does Dexter change in any morally meaningful way? Or are we just watching a more elaborate plan fail in slow motion? To keep this clear, we have to hold two truths at once. Yes, Dexter develops a conscience. And no, it never arrives in time to save the people who needed it most. From the beginning, Harry's code is framed as control, stalk the target, confirm the victims, prepare the kill room. But underneath that structure is something messier that Harry never admits. Dexter cares when innocents get hurt. He protects children. He reroutes kills when investigations might hit the wrong person. Even in Season 1, when Deb is on the ice truck killer's table, we watch Dexter abandon the perfect Bay Harbor butcher cover to save her. The psychology may be tangled, but the priority is clear. As the seasons escalate, that fractured conscience keeps showing up at the exact moments his fantasy of control should be strongest. He chooses Rita and the family fantasy over running with Leela. He spares Lumen, then helps her hunt her abusers, knowing every step increases the odds of collapse. He lets Hannah live because he recognizes trauma and a warped reflection of his own hunger for connection. Each major section of his life adds another data point. When the choice is between the flawless kill and the person in front of him, Dexter's plans start to bend. By the time we reach New Blood, the trajectory is brutal. Dexter chooses Harrison over the safest lie. He breaks his own code, kills an innocent cop, and watches the last illusion of being the good monster evaporate in his son's eyes. And this time, instead of running, he accepts the verdict. He engineers his own death because he finally believes that stopping the damage matters more than his survival. That's not Harry's voice. That's his. So no, Dexter is not tragic because he was doomed to be a monster. He's tragic because he grew a conscience inside a life, specifically designed to weaponize it, turning empathy into leverage, love into collateral, guilt into yet another tool for justification. The focus is not just on whether he's redeemed, but on how that late-blooming moral sense becomes the engine of his downfall. Now it's on us. Do we see Dexter as redeemed by that final choice, irredeemable no matter what, or trapped in something unsettling in between? Drop your take in the comments. Tell us which moment convinced you he did, or didn't, change, and if this breakdown pulled you back into his world, hit like, subscribe, and stick around. Along the way, we'll keep digging into characters whose most human trait is also the thing that finally destroys them.